Welcome back to my channel Sleep Beneath History, my friend. Tonight, I want you to get comfortable, relax your body, and let your mind slowly leave the modern world behind. Because tonight, we are going to travel back more than 800 years. We are going back to the year 1212, a time when Europe looked very different from the world we know today. There were no cars moving along the roads, no trains crossing the countryside, no airplanes in the sky, no electric lights shining through the night. Instead, there were small villages surrounded by fields. There were wooden houses, stone churches, quiet monasteries, busy markets, dusty roads, horse carts, farmers working beneath the sun. And at night there were only candles, small fires, moonlight, and the stars above. But tonight's story is not simply about medieval life. Tonight, we are going to follow one of the strangest and most mysterious movements in medieval history. A movement that became known as the Children's Crusade. It is a story about young people. It is a story about faith. It is a story about hope. It is a story about Jerusalem. And it is also a story filled with questions. Why did young people decide to leave their homes? Who told them to go? Did they really believe they could reach Jerusalem? What did their families think? How many people actually joined them? And what happened when these young travelers began walking across Europe? Some of the stories told about the Children's Crusade sound almost impossible. Some medieval writers described enormous crowds. Some described miracles. Some described young shepherds receiving holy messages. Some stories say that the children believed the sea would open for them. And some stories say that terrible things happened when they finally reached the Mediterranean. But how much of this is true? How much became legend? And what was life really like for the young people who became connected with this strange journey? Tonight, we will take our time finding out. We will not rush from one event to another. We will walk slowly through medieval Europe. We will visit quiet villages. We will listen to church bells. We will sit beside warm fires. We will imagine the simple meals eaten by ordinary families. We will think about what childhood meant in the 13th century. We will learn about the Crusades that came before 1212. We will meet the young people whose names became connected with the movement. And slowly, step by step, we will follow the road that led them toward Jerusalem. Some parts of this story are well documented. Other parts remain uncertain. So as we travel through the story, we will gently separate history from later legend. There is no need to hurry. There is nowhere else you need to be. You can simply listen. Perhaps you are already lying in bed. Perhaps the room around you is dark. Perhaps there is only a little light beside you. So take a slow breath. Let your shoulders relax. Let your hands rest comfortably. And imagine that the sounds of the modern world are becoming quieter. The traffic disappears. The screens disappear. The bright lights disappear. And slowly, the world around you begins to change. Imagine that you are standing beside a medieval road. The year is 1212. The morning is cool. Mist rests over the fields. A few birds are calling from the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings. You look toward the village. Smoke rises slowly from the rooftops. People are beginning their day's work. A farmer walks toward the fields. A woman carries a basket. A child follows an older family member. A horse moves slowly beside a wooden cart. Everything is quiet. Everything is slow. And far beyond this little village, beyond the forests and mountains, beyond the rivers and distant lands, there is a city that has captured the imagination of people for generations. Jerusalem, a holy city, A distant city. A city that most of these people will never see. But tonight, we are going to follow the people who believed they could reach it. We are going to follow their footsteps. We are going to listen to their stories. And we are going to discover how a strange idea grew into a movement. So make yourself comfortable. Close your eyes if you wish. And let us begin our journey. Because before the children could walk toward Jerusalem, there was a whole world they had to leave behind. A world of family. A world of farms. A world of churches. A world of hard work. A world of faith. A world where distant story could become powerful enough to change a young person's life. And as the night grows quiet, let us take our first slow walk into medieval Europe. But who were these young people, and what was the world like when they first heard the call to travel toward Jerusalem? Let us begin. Chapter 1: The World of 1212. Imagine that you are standing in Europe in the year 1212. It is early morning. The sun has only just begun to rise. A pale light spreads slowly across the countryside. The fields are covered with a thin layer of morning mist. The grass is wet. Birds are beginning to call from the trees. And somewhere nearby, a wooden door opens. A farmer steps outside. He pauses for a moment. Then he looks toward the fields. Another day is beginning. It is an ordinary morning. At least it seems ordinary. Nobody standing in that village knows that the year ahead will become connected with one of the strangest stories of medieval Europe. Nobody knows that young people will soon begin talking about Jerusalem. Nobody knows that groups of travelers will begin walking along the roads. Nobody knows that centuries later, historians will still be asking what really happened. For now, life continues as it always has. Quietly, slowly, according to the seasons, according to the rising and setting of the sun, according to the church bells, and according to the work that must be done. To understand the children's crusade, we first need to understand this world. Because the young people of 1212 did not live in our world. They did not think about distance in the way we do. They did not have maps on their phones. They could not search for Jerusalem on a screen. They could not book a room for the night. They could not call home if they became lost. They could not step onto a train and travel hundreds of miles in a few hours. Travel was slow. Travel was difficult. And for many ordinary people, travel was unusual. Most people lived close to the place where they were born. A village could be the center of an entire life. You were born there. You grew up there. You worked there. You married there. You raised children there. And perhaps you were buried there. You knew the fields around the village. You knew the stream. You knew the woods. You knew the church. You knew the families living nearby. You knew which road led to the market. You knew where the animals were kept. You knew where the crops grew best. This was your world. Beyond it were other places, but they could feel very far away. Imagine walking along a medieval village road. The road is not smooth. There is no pavement. After rain, there is mud. During dry weather, there is dust. The road passes between fields. You see wheat moving gently in the wind. You see vegetables growing in small plots. You see animals grazing. A few trees provide shade. In the distance, you can see the roof of a church. The church is important. For medieval Christians, religion is part of everyday life. It is not something that belongs only to 1 hour on one day. Religion touches almost everything. People pray when they wake. They pray before meals. They pray for the sick. They pray for good harvests. They pray during storms. They pray for family members. They pray for the dead. Church bells mark the passing of time. Religious festivals mark the passing of the year. The stories of the Bible are repeated again and again. The stories of Jesus are familiar. The stories of saints are familiar. Stories of miracles are familiar. And stories about holy places are familiar. One place more than many others carries a special meaning. Jerusalem. For medieval Christians, Jerusalem is not simply a distant city. It is a sacred place. A place connected with Jesus. A place connected with the Bible. A place connected with Christian pilgrimage. And for more than 100 years before 1212, Jerusalem has also been connected with the Crusades. To understand what happened in 1212, we need to go back more than a century earlier. In the year 1095, Pope Urban II called on Western Christians to take part in a major expedition to the Eastern Mediterranean. His call helped begin the First Crusade. Thousands of people answered. Knights traveled. Nobles traveled. Ordinary people traveled. Pilgrims traveled. They left their homes. They crossed mountains. They crossed rivers. They traveled through unfamiliar lands. Eventually, in 1099, Crusaders captured Jerusalem. The story of the First Crusade became famous. It was told in churches. It was told by travelers. It was told by families. It became part of the memory of medieval Europe. And the Crusades continued. Other expeditions followed. Some were large. Some were smaller. Some were carefully organized. Others were much less organized. The Eastern Mediterranean remained a place of conflict between different political and religious powers. But to an ordinary person in a small European village, the complicated politics might not have been easy to understand. What they heard was often simpler. Jerusalem was holy. Christians had fought for it. People had traveled there. Kings had traveled there. Knights had traveled there. Pilgrims had traveled there. And the Holy Land was still far away. For a young person hearing these stories, Jerusalem could seem almost like a place from another world. Imagine sitting beside a fire in the evening. The day's work is finished. The animals are quiet. The room is warm. A small flame moves gently. Someone begins telling a story. Perhaps the story is about a pilgrim who traveled east. Perhaps it is about a knight. Perhaps it is about a saint. Perhaps it is about Jerusalem. You listen. You have never been there. You have never seen the sea. You may never have traveled more than a few days from your home. But in your imagination, you can see it. A great city, stone walls, churches, crowded streets, distant hills, a place where the story of Christianity began. The story becomes real inside your mind. This is the world of the young people who would later become connected with the Children's Crusade. And there is something else we need to understand. The word child did not always mean exactly what it means today. Medieval writers used words for young people in ways that can be difficult for modern historians to interpret. Some of the people described in later accounts may have been children. Some may have been teenagers. Some may have been young adults. There may also have been poor people and other ordinary travelers involved. So we should not imagine a neat group of tiny children walking together in a single line. The reality was more complicated. The movement was made up of different people, different ages, different backgrounds, different reasons, and the sources are not always clear. This is one of the reasons the story is so fascinating. There is a real historical event behind the legend. but the details became confused over time. Some stories grew larger. Some details may have been misunderstood. Some may have been added later. So tonight we will move carefully. We will not pretend that every old story is a proven fact. Instead, we will listen to what the medieval sources tell us and notice where the evidence becomes uncertain. Now imagine the daily life of a young person in 1212. The day begins early. There is work to do. Perhaps you help with animals. Perhaps you carry water. Perhaps you help in the fields. Perhaps you help prepare food. Perhaps you work in a workshop. Life depends on the family, and families depend on work. There is no modern idea of childhood in which every young person simply spends years studying and playing. Some young people certainly had time for games. They laughed. They played. They told stories. They explored. But many also helped with daily work. Life was physical. A young person might carry wood, feed animals, gather eggs, help with crops, carry messages, watch younger children, or assist a parent. Food was simple. Bread was one of the most important foods. Porridge was common. Beans and peas could be stored. Vegetables were eaten when available. Cheese and eggs were useful foods. Meat was available in some households, but it was not an everyday food for everyone. The quality of life depended greatly on wealth and harvest. A rich family ate differently from a poor family. A noble child lived differently from a farm worker's child. A child in a town might grow up around merchants and craftsmen. A child in the countryside might spend most of the day around fields and animals. There was no single medieval childhood. There were many. And yet, religion connected many of these lives. A child could grow up hearing the same stories, the same prayers, the same names. And among those names was Jerusalem. Now imagine the evening again. The sun has disappeared. The village is dark. The stars are bright. There are no electric lights. The darkness feels complete. A candle burns inside a house. A family sits together. Someone speaks. Perhaps the conversation turns toward religion. Perhaps someone mentions the Crusades. Perhaps someone remembers a traveler who passed through recently. The traveler had stories. Stories from far away. Stories about cities. Stories about the Holy Land. The young people listen. Their world expands. They begin to imagine places they have never seen. This is how ideas travel. Not through newspapers. Not through television. Not through social media. Through people. A traveler speaks. Someone listens. Then that person tells another. A story moves from one village to another. And sometimes, as the story travels, it changes. A small event becomes a larger event. A rumor becomes a fact. A person becomes a hero. A number becomes enormous. This would matter greatly to the story of 1212, because the numbers given by medieval writers are often difficult to trust. Some writers described huge crowds, but medieval writers did not always count people in the precise way we expect today. Sometimes large numbers were used simply to express that a crowd was enormous. Sometimes one writer copied another. Sometimes a later writer repeated a story without knowing whether it was accurate. So when we hear that tens of thousands of children marched across Europe, we should slow down. We should not immediately imagine a massive army of small children. The historical reality was likely much more complicated. But something did happen. Groups of young people and ordinary people became connected with crusading ideas in 1212. And that is where our story begins to become truly unusual. Because these people were not simply following a king. They were not part of a normal army. They were not moving according to a carefully prepared military plan. They were part of a popular religious movement. A movement built around belief. And belief can be powerful, especially in a world where religion is deeply woven into everyday life. Imagine hearing that God has chosen ordinary people for a special task. Imagine hearing that powerful adults have failed. Imagine hearing that young people may succeed because their faith is pure. For someone living in 1212, such an idea would not necessarily sound absurd. It belonged to a world filled with stories of saints and miracles. It belonged to a world where visions were taken seriously. It belonged to a world where holy journeys were considered meaningful. And so slowly, the idea of a journey began to grow. A journey toward Jerusalem. A journey unlike anything most of these young people had ever imagined. But before that journey could begin, one young person would step forward. His name was Stephen. Stephen of Cloyes. According to later accounts, Stephen was a shepherd boy from northern France. And according to the traditional story, something happened to him that changed everything. He believed that he had received a message from Jesus. A message connected with the Crusade. A message connected with the King. A message connected with Jerusalem. Imagine the scene. A young shepherd standing among ordinary fields. Sheep nearby. The wind moving through the grass. The sun above him. The village somewhere in the distance. And then a story of a vision. A message. A calling. Whatever we think about the truth of the vision itself, the important historical point is that Stephen became associated with a movement that began to attract other people. He would eventually travel. He would speak. People would listen. And soon others would follow. But that is still ahead of us. For now, the village is quiet. The fields are dark. The animals are sleeping. The church stands beneath the stars. A young shepherd is resting somewhere in northern France. And he does not yet know how far his story will travel. He does not know that people will repeat his name centuries later. He does not know that historians will question almost every part of his story. He only knows what he believes. And sometimes belief is enough to make a person take the first step. The first step onto the road. The first step away from home. The first step toward a place that seems impossibly far away. Jerusalem. But what exactly did Stephen see? Why did he believe that he had been chosen? And how did one young shepherd's story become powerful enough to bring other young people onto the road? As the night grows quiet, we will leave the village behind for now. And in the next chapter, we will meet Stephen and hear the strange story that would begin the French movement of 1212. So rest for a moment. Listen to the quiet road. The journey has only just begun. The morning comes quietly over northern France. The darkness slowly fades. The fields become visible again. A pale line of sunlight appears beyond the trees. The dew still rests on the grass. And somewhere among these fields, a young shepherd begins another ordinary day. His name is Stephen. Stephen of Cloyes. We do not know everything about him. In fact, the surviving records leave many parts of his life unclear. We do not know exactly what he looked like. We do not know what his family was like in detail. We do not know precisely how old he was. We do not know how he spent every ordinary day. Most of his life has disappeared into the quiet distance of history. But one part of his story survived. The story of a message. A message that Stephen believed had come from Jesus. And this message would change everything. So let us slow down. Imagine Stephen standing in a field. Perhaps the morning is cool. Perhaps the sheep are moving slowly across the grass. Perhaps he is holding a simple wooden staff. The countryside around him looks peaceful. There is nothing extraordinary about it. The grass moves in the wind. Birds move between the trees. A distant farmer works in another field. The village is quiet. And yet, according to the traditional account, something extraordinary happens. Stephen experiences a vision. He believes that Jesus appears to him. And Stephen believes that he is given an important task. He is to go to the King of France. He is to deliver a message. And that message concerns the Crusade. Imagine what this might have felt like. You are young. You come from an ordinary background. You are not a knight. You are not a noble. You have no army. You have no wealth. You have no position at court. And yet you believe that you have been given a message from heaven. The message is not small. It is not about your family. It is not about your village. It is about Jerusalem. It is about the Holy Land. It is about the great religious struggle that has shaped European history for generations. Such a belief could be overwhelming. Perhaps Stephen was afraid. Perhaps he was excited. Perhaps he was uncertain. Perhaps he simply believed. We cannot know his private thoughts. The medieval sources do not give us his inner voice. They give us a story. And that story says Stephen did not keep the message to himself. He went to speak about it. The first people he would have needed to convince were ordinary people. People from villages. People who knew him. People who might have seen him as only a young shepherd. Imagine someone hearing him speak. A young shepherd says he has received a message from Jesus. Some people might listen carefully. Others might smile. Some might doubt. Some might be curious. Some might believe. There is no reason to imagine that everyone immediately accepted him. Human beings have always been different in the way they respond to unusual claims. One person believes quickly. Another asks questions. Another laughs. Another waits. Another quietly follows. And yet Stephen's story began to spread. This is where the world of medieval communication becomes important. There was no newspaper. There was no printed poster. There was no internet. There was no public announcement system. If Stephen wanted people to hear him, he had to speak. He had to travel. Others had to repeat his words. And those words had to move from village to village. Imagine a small group standing near a road. Stephen is speaking. A few young people are listening. Someone has heard that a great journey is being planned. Someone else says that Stephen has seen Jesus. Another person says that the Holy Land is waiting. The conversation continues. Then someone goes home. They tell their family. The family tells a neighbor. The neighbor tells a friend. And the story travels. Slowly, quietly, one person at a time. This is how a movement can begin in a world without modern communication. It begins with voices. It begins with belief. It begins with people telling one another that something important is happening. But there was something especially powerful about Stephen's story. He was young. He was not a powerful man. He did not have the authority of a king. He did not have the military strength of a knight. He did not have the wealth of a noble. And yet he believed that heaven had chosen him. For some people, that could make his message more convincing. The humble messenger, the simple shepherd, the young person, the one who had nothing. In medieval religious thinking, humility could have great meaning. The poor could be spiritually important. The weak could be chosen by God. A person did not need to be rich or powerful to be holy. Stories about saints often emphasized this. A humble person could become important. A poor person could become a messenger. A young person could have great faith. So Stephen's identity as a young shepherd may have helped his story attract attention. He was not speaking as a prince. He was speaking as an ordinary person. And perhaps that made other ordinary people feel that they too could be part of something special. Let us imagine the countryside again. The sun is now higher. The morning mist has disappeared. Stephen walks along a dirt road. His staff touches the ground as he walks. The road passes through fields. There are no road signs, no painted lines, no traffic, only footsteps. A cart passes slowly. A farmer looks up. Someone waves. Stephen continues. He is heading toward Paris. The capital is far away, and his destination is even more important. The king, Philip II of France. Philip is one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. He has armies. He has wealth. He has officials. He has nobles around him. He lives in a world completely different from Stephen's village. Imagine Stephen entering that world. The change would be enormous. The countryside is quiet. The royal court is not. There are servants moving through rooms. Knights, clerks, religious men, nobles, messengers, people carrying documents, people waiting for decisions, people discussing land, taxes, wars, marriage, politics. The king's world is filled with responsibility. And then comes a young shepherd. He carries a message that he believes comes from Jesus. According to the traditional story, Stephen presents a letter to King Philip. The letter is supposedly from Christ. The message asks the king to support a crusade. Imagine the silence in the room. A young shepherd stands before the king. He says that he has been given a divine message. He believes that this message must be heard. Perhaps everyone in the room looks at him. Perhaps the king listens. Perhaps the king asks questions. Perhaps Stephen explains his vision. We do not know exactly what was said. The details are uncertain. But the traditional story tells us something important. The king did not simply accept Stephen's request. Philip II was not persuaded to launch a crusade led by the young followers. Instead, he sought advice from religious authorities. And eventually, Stephen's movement did not receive royal approval. This is an important moment, because it shows the difference between personal belief and political power. Stephen could believe that he had a divine mission. Other people could believe him. But the king had to think about the kingdom. He had to consider what would happen if thousands of people left their homes. He had to consider money, food, security. The Crusades were expensive. They required ships, supplies, weapons, leaders, organization. A spontaneous movement of young people was something entirely different. The king could not simply say, "Go." And so the movement continued without the kind of royal support Stephen may have hoped for. But the rejection did not necessarily make the idea disappear. Sometimes being rejected can make believers more determined. If a powerful person says no, a believer may decide that the powerful person simply does not understand. Perhaps the mission is too important. Perhaps the king is afraid. Perhaps God wants ordinary people to act. We cannot know what Stephen thought. But his story continued. And as it continued, more young people became interested. The movement began to take shape, not as a formal army, not as a government project, but as a gathering, a group of people who believed that they should travel toward the Holy Land. Imagine the first few followers. Perhaps they are young, perhaps some are older, perhaps they come from different villages. They carry small bundles, a little food, simple clothing, walking staffs, perhaps crosses, perhaps religious objects. They do not have military equipment. They are not preparing for battle. Their journey is based on faith. They believe that somehow, by traveling toward Jerusalem, they can accomplish something that armies could not. There is a powerful idea behind this. The idea that purity might succeed where force had failed. The idea that children or young people, because they were innocent, might be heard by God. The idea that the sea itself might somehow become open to them. This kind of thinking was connected to older religious stories. The Bible contains stories of miraculous journeys. The sea parting for Moses. People crossing impossible distances. The weak defeating the strong. The humble becoming important. For medieval Christians, these stories were not simply ancient literature. They were sacred history. They were part of the way people understood the world. So perhaps a young person could look at the story of Moses and think that God could still perform miracles. Perhaps a group could believe that if their faith was strong enough, the impossible could become possible. The idea would become even stronger as more people joined. Imagine a small group becoming larger. At first, perhaps 10 people, then 20, then 50, then more. Someone sees the group. They ask where everyone is going. Someone answers, to Jerusalem. The listener asks why. The answer is simple. Because we have been called. The story moves on. More people hear. Some join. Some leave. Others simply watch. A movement grows. But the road is not easy. Even before leaving France, the young travelers face practical problems. Where will they sleep? What will they eat? Who will protect them? Who will guide them? Who will pay for food? Who will care for those who become sick? These questions matter. Faith does not remove hunger. Faith does not remove tiredness. Faith does not make a long road shorter. And this is where the romantic image of the children's crusade begins to fade. The real people involved were human beings. They had bodies. They became tired. They became hungry. They needed rest. They needed water. They needed shelter. A large group of travelers could put pressure on every village they passed. Imagine 50 people arriving at your village. Then 100. Then perhaps hundreds. The local baker has only so much bread. The local well has only so much water. The local houses have only so much space. The local farmers have only so much food. In medieval Europe, communities were often small. A sudden crowd could be difficult to support. Some villages might welcome travelers. Others might be cautious. Some might offer food. Others might refuse. Some people might give charity. Others might see an opportunity to make money. Human reactions would vary. And as the movement grew, so did the distance. Stephen's followers would eventually have to move beyond the places they knew. The familiar countryside would disappear. New towns would appear. New roads. New rivers. New people. The journey would become less like a local pilgrimage and more like a great migration. But before we follow them farther, we should pause and think about Stephen himself. What kind of young person was he? The truth is that we cannot say with confidence. The sources are too limited. The image of Stephen as a simple shepherd boy is part of the traditional story. Perhaps he really was a shepherd. Perhaps he was very young. Perhaps his story became simplified over time. Perhaps later writers shaped his image because the idea of a shepherd leading a religious movement was powerful. A shepherd has a special place in Christian symbolism. Jesus himself is described as a shepherd. The Bible contains many shepherds. David was a shepherd before becoming king. So a young shepherd claiming a divine mission would have carried symbolic meaning. It was a familiar image. A humble person, a shepherd, a young person, a messenger. It was the kind of story people remembered. And perhaps that is one reason Stephen's name survived. Not because we know everything about him, but because his story fit deeply into the religious imagination of medieval Europe. Now imagine Stephen speaking to his followers again. The sun is beginning to fall. The road is quiet. The group rests near a village. Some people sit on the ground. Others lean against trees. A few prepare food. Someone drinks water. Someone repairs a shoe. The younger travelers talk softly. There is no excitement in every moment. Most of the journey is ordinary. Waiting, walking, resting, eating, sleeping, and perhaps during one of these quiet evenings, someone asks the question that matters most. Will we really reach Jerusalem? Maybe Stephen answers with confidence. Maybe he says yes. Maybe he says that God will show the way. Maybe others repeat the same belief. And the group settles down for the night. The stars appear. The fire becomes smaller. The road disappears into darkness. Jerusalem is still impossibly far away. But belief makes the distance feel smaller. This is the strange power of a journey. Once you begin, turning back can feel harder. You have left home. You have told people what you are doing. You have joined others. You have taken the first steps. And now the road seems to have a life of its own. As the movement grew, Stephen's message reached more people. And somewhere else in Europe, another young person was beginning a similar movement. His name was Nicholas. Nicholas was associated with the Rhineland in the German lands. His story would become connected with another group of young travelers. Nicholas would claim a divine calling. He would gather followers, and they too would begin moving toward the Holy Land. This is important, because the Children's Crusade was not simply one group. There were different movements in different regions. The French movement connected with Stephen. The German movement connected with Nicholas. They developed separately. Their stories were later brought together by writers. And this makes the whole subject even more complicated. Imagine Europe as a huge landscape. Far apart from one another, groups of young people hear similar ideas. They hear about Jerusalem. They hear about the Crusades. They hear that ordinary people might be able to accomplish something extraordinary. And in different places, people begin moving. The roads become filled with pilgrims. Some carry crosses. Some carry simple bundles. Some walk barefoot. Others have shoes. Some have families with them. Some travel alone. Some join groups. The movement does not have the neat organization of a modern expedition. It is more like a stream. Small streams come together. Some separate. Some disappear. Others grow. And slowly the stream moves toward the sea. But the sea is still far away. There are rivers first. There are mountains. There are towns. There are political borders. There are places where the travelers must stop. And there are people who will try to understand what these young travelers are doing. Some may see them as pilgrims. Some may see them as foolish. Some may see them as holy. Some may see them as a burden. Some may see an opportunity. The world is full of different reactions. And this is where the story begins to become less simple. Because the dream of Jerusalem is beautiful. But the road to Jerusalem is not. It is long. It is tiring. And it passes through a world that does not always care about dreams. A world where food must be paid for. Where roads belong to different rulers. Where rivers can stop travelers. Where strangers may not always be welcomed. Where a young person far from home can become vulnerable. Still they walk. Step by step. The road continues. And as evening arrives, the travelers find a place to rest. Perhaps beneath a roof. Perhaps inside a barn. Perhaps beside a church. Perhaps outside beneath the stars. They eat whatever food is available. Bread, porridge, beans, a little cheese, water, nothing luxurious. Then they sleep. The next morning they will walk again. And perhaps someone will join them. Perhaps someone will leave. Perhaps someone will begin to wonder whether the journey is possible. But the dream remains. Jerusalem, the holy city, the distant destination, the place that exists beyond the horizon. And now, as we come to the end of this chapter, let us return to the quiet fields of France. The same fields where Stephen's story began. The grass moves gently in the evening wind. The sheep are resting. The village is quiet. A church bell sounds once. Then the sound fades. Stephen is no longer simply a shepherd in a small village. His name is beginning to travel. People are hearing his story. Young people are listening. And some are preparing to follow him. A journey is becoming a movement. A movement is becoming a crowd. And a crowd is beginning to move toward the unknown. But there's still a long road ahead. Before Jerusalem, there are towns to cross, rivers to cross, mountains to cross, and eventually the Great Sea. The travelers do not yet know what awaits them there. They only know that they are going forward. And perhaps, somewhere in the quiet of the night, one young traveler looks up at the stars and wonders how far away Jerusalem really is. The answer is difficult to imagine. Very far. Farther than most of them have ever traveled. Farther than most of them have ever dreamed of traveling. But tomorrow they will walk again. And the story will move with them. So let yourself rest here for a moment. Listen to the quiet. Imagine the soft sound of footsteps on the old road. One step, then another, then another. The travelers continue. And in the next chapter, we will leave the quiet countryside behind and follow the growing movement as more young people begin to gather. We will see what happened when Stephen's message spread beyond the first villages. We will look at how people joined the journey. We will imagine the roads, the food, the sleeping places, and the daily life of the travelers. And we will slowly move closer to the great journey that would become one of medieval history's most mysterious stories. For now, the road is quiet. The stars are bright. And the journey continues. The morning comes again. The fields are quiet. A soft wind moves through the grass. The first light of day touches the roofs of the village. And along one of the old roads of northern France, a small group of travelers begins to move. There is no great army. There are no shining rows of knights. There are no trumpets. There is no great royal banner. There are simply people walking. Young people, Older people, pilgrims, poor villagers, and curious travelers who have decided to follow. At the center of the story is still the young shepherd Stephen. His message has begun to travel. People have heard that he received a vision. People have heard that he was told to speak about Jerusalem. People have heard that a great journey is beginning. And slowly, more people are becoming interested. Imagine standing beside the road as they pass. You might see a young person carrying a small cloth bundle. Another person might carry a walking staff. Someone may have a wooden cross. Someone else might carry bread wrapped in cloth. A few people may have small bags. There is no uniform. There is no official clothing. There is no neat line. The travelers look like ordinary people. And that is one of the strange things about the story. They are ordinary people trying to do something extraordinary. They are leaving behind familiar places. They are stepping onto unfamiliar roads. And many of them are young. But before we follow them farther, let us slow down and think about what it meant to leave home in medieval Europe. Today, if you decide to travel to another country, you can prepare for the journey. You can look at a map. You can check the weather. You can buy a ticket. You can reserve a hotel. You can contact your family. You can carry a small device that tells you exactly where you are. The travelers of 1212 had none of these things. A journey began with preparation. You needed food. You needed clothing. You needed shoes. You needed some kind of container for water. You needed somewhere to sleep. You needed to know at least roughly where the road went. And if you were traveling with many people, you needed to depend on others. Perhaps a monastery would offer shelter. Perhaps a village would provide food. Perhaps a wealthy person would give money. Perhaps a church would open its doors. But there was no guarantee. The road was always uncertain. Imagine being very young and standing at the edge of your village. Behind you are the houses you know, the church where you have prayed, the fields where you have worked, the people you know by name, the well where you collect water, the trees you have climbed, the path you have walked many times, and ahead of you is a road you have never seen. You turn around. You look back. Perhaps your mother is standing there. Perhaps your father. Perhaps a brother or sister. Perhaps a friend. You do not know when you will see them again. Maybe you believe you will return soon. Maybe you believe the journey will be short. Maybe you believe a miracle will happen. Maybe you believe you are doing something important. Whatever you believe, the moment of leaving is real. Your feet move forward, and home begins to disappear behind you. This is one of the quietest parts of the story. The moment before the legend. The moment before the crowds. A young person leaves home. The road opens, and the journey begins. As Stephen's message spread, people began to gather. The movement was not created by a single official order. There was no royal command telling everyone to join. There was no military officer organizing the march. The movement grew through belief. People heard. People talked. People joined. And some may have encouraged others. A friend might say, "Come with me." A brother might follow a sister. A young person might hear the story from a neighbor. A family might discuss it. A group of villagers might decide to travel together. This is how a crowd can grow. Not all at once, but little by little. Imagine a road that is almost empty. Then a few people appear. They walk slowly. After some distance, another group joins them. Then another. Soon the road is no longer empty. There are voices, footsteps, children, adults, animals, carts, bundles, walking staffs, the sound of many people moving together. The road begins to feel different. A traveler coming from the opposite direction might stop and ask, "Where are you going?" Someone answers, "Toward Jerusalem." The traveler may be surprised. Jerusalem is very far away. But the group continues, and perhaps the traveler carries the story to the next town. More people hear about it. The movement grows. This is the world of medieval rumor. A story can become larger as it travels. A group of several hundred can become thousands in someone's telling. A young shepherd can become a prophet. A religious journey can become a miracle. And the sea can become a place where people expect God to act. We will come to that later. For now, let us stay on the road. The travelers need food. Food is one of the most important parts of any journey. Imagine the evening meal. There is no restaurant waiting for them. No large kitchen. No packaged food. Instead, people depend on what they carry or what they can obtain along the way. Bread is the most reliable food. It can be carried. It can be stored. It can be broken into pieces and shared. There may be beans, peas, onions, cheese, eggs, perhaps dried food, perhaps whatever vegetables are available. Sometimes meat. But a large traveling group cannot depend on meat every day. Bread is easier. Porridge is easier. Grain is easier. Water is essential. And water can be found in wells, streams, and rivers. But clean water cannot always be guaranteed. The travelers must think carefully. Where can they stop? Where can they rest? Where can they find food? Where can they sleep? These practical questions follow them every day. Imagine the end of a long day's walk. The sun is low. The road has become quiet. The travelers are tired. Some sit on the ground. Some lean against trees. Some remove their shoes. Their feet hurt. A few people prepare food. Someone lights a small fire. Smoke rises into the evening air. The smell of warm grain fills the space around them. People talk quietly. Someone tells a story. Someone prays. Someone simply sits in silence. A young traveler looks at the sky. The first stars appear. For a moment, the journey may feel peaceful. The destination is still far away. But tonight there is food. There is water. There are other people nearby. And tomorrow is still tomorrow. This is how a long journey is experienced. Not as one enormous distance, but as one day. Then another. Then another. One road. One village. One night. One morning. And then the next road. The young travelers continue. But as the group grows, the reaction of local people becomes important. Not everyone will be happy to see them. Imagine a small village suddenly hearing that hundreds of travelers are approaching. The village has limited food, limited space, limited water. People may become worried. Where will everyone sleep? Who will feed them? What if they remain for several days? What if they become sick? What if there is not enough grain? Medieval communities often lived close to the edge of what they could produce. A bad harvest could cause serious problems. Food was precious, so a huge group of travelers could be difficult to support. Some communities may have helped. Others may have refused. Some may have given bread. Others may have asked for payment. And some people may have taken advantage of the travelers. The medieval world could be generous. It could also be harsh. There were people who gave charity. There were also people who saw vulnerable travelers as an opportunity. This is one reason we should not imagine the journey as a simple, peaceful walk through a friendly countryside. The travelers were entering unfamiliar places. They were dependent on strangers, and many were young. That made them vulnerable, but their faith continued to give them confidence. They believed that the journey mattered. They believed that Jerusalem was waiting. They believed that God would guide them. And perhaps they believed that miracles were possible. The idea of miracles was not strange to them. Stories of miracles were part of medieval religious life. People heard about saints healing the sick. They heard about visions. They heard about holy objects. They heard about divine intervention. So perhaps the impossible journey did not seem completely impossible. If God wanted them to reach Jerusalem, then surely God could make a way. This thought may have been at the heart of the movement. Not practical planning, not military strength. Faith, a belief that the destination was possible because God would make it possible. And this belief would soon be tested, because the road ahead was long. Very long. Let us imagine the map in our minds. France is behind us. The Holy Land is far to the east. Between them are countless roads and territories. The travelers must cross regions where different rulers have authority. They must cross rivers. They must find safe routes. They must continue moving. And somewhere ahead is the Mediterranean Sea. The sea is a major problem. A person can walk across Europe, but they cannot simply walk across the Mediterranean. They need ships. They need sailors. They need money. They need food for the journey. They need somewhere to land. And above all, they need someone willing to carry them. For a group of poor young pilgrims, this is not easy. But they do not yet know how difficult it will become. They are still moving through the countryside. The road continues. And as the group moves, stories continue to spread. Stephen is no longer simply one young shepherd. He has become a leader, at least in the stories told about the movement. People listen to him. They believe his message. They follow him. And the larger the group becomes, the more powerful the idea feels. Imagine standing at the edge of a road and seeing hundreds of people pass. Perhaps someone asks, "Why are they going?" The answer comes again. Jerusalem. The word itself is enough. Jerusalem, a city far away, a holy city, a city connected to the life of Jesus, a place where history and faith meet. The travelers continue, and perhaps some people watching them feel inspired. Perhaps they think, maybe I should go too. This is how movements grow. People do not always join because of careful reasoning. Sometimes they join because everyone around them is moving. Sometimes because they are afraid of missing something. Sometimes because they believe. Sometimes because they want adventure. Sometimes because home is difficult. Sometimes because someone they trust has joined. We cannot know the reason of every person. The movement was made up of many individual stories. Each person had a life before the journey. Each person had a reason for leaving. And many of those stories have been lost forever. That is one of the saddest things about history. We remember the name of a leader. We remember a famous event. But the ordinary people disappear. We do not know the name of the young girl walking at the back of the group. We do not know the name of the boy carrying bread. We do not know the name of the mother worried about her child. We do not know the name of the old traveler who joined them for part of the road. Their names are gone, But they were real. They had voices. They had homes. They had families. They had memories. And they walked, step by step. The journey continues. As evening falls, the group stops again. Perhaps they find shelter near a church. Perhaps they sleep in a barn. Perhaps they simply rest outdoors. There are no comfortable beds for everyone. Some sleep on straw. Some sleep on blankets. Some sleep directly on the ground. The night air becomes cold. People pull their clothing closer around themselves. The fire burns low. A few travelers continue talking. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone asks how far Jerusalem might be. Nobody knows exactly. A person may say it is very far. Another may say they will reach it soon. The uncertainty is part of the journey. And perhaps this uncertainty makes the story feel even stranger. They are walking toward a place many of them cannot locate precisely. They do not know the exact roads. They do not know how long it will take. They do not know where they will sleep tomorrow. But they continue. The next morning arrives. The fire is almost cold. The sky becomes light. Birds begin to sing. The travelers wake. Some yawn. Some stretch. Some gather their belongings. Someone divides the remaining bread. Then they begin walking again. The road stretches ahead. And behind them is another night. Another village. Another field. Another piece of home that is now far away. This is the quiet rhythm of the journey. And somewhere along this road, the movement begins to attract more attention. The story is becoming known. People are talking about it. Churchmen hear about it. Local officials hear about it. Merchants hear about it. Travelers hear about it. Some people are impressed. Some are suspicious. Some may believe that something holy is happening. Others may think the young people are being misled. The authorities begin to notice. This is natural. A large group of people moving across a kingdom cannot remain invisible. Kings may hear. Nobles may hear. Church leaders may hear. And some may worry. A group without a clear military leader or political authority could be difficult to control. What happens if they become angry? What happens if they cannot find food? What happens if they enter a city? What happens if they demand something? What happens if they refuse to turn back? These questions would matter. But the movement continues. Stephen's followers are still heading toward the south. And somewhere in the German lands, another young leader is preparing for his own journey. Nicholas. His story resembles Stephen's in some ways. He is young. He believes he has received a divine calling. He believes that young people can succeed where adults have failed. And he begins to gather followers. But Nicholas's story will take a different path. His followers will travel across the German lands. They will move toward the Alps. They will face mountains. And eventually they will reach Italy. The French movement and the German movement are separate. But later historians and writers connected them because of their similarities. Both were associated with young people. Both were connected with crusading. Both were driven by religious belief. Both involved large groups. And both became surrounded by stories. The movement is now becoming something larger than Stephen himself. It has become an idea. The idea that the young can do what armies cannot. The idea that faith can open the way. The idea that innocence can overcome power. And perhaps most importantly, the idea that the sea itself might one day open. That idea will become one of the most famous parts of the story. But it has not happened yet. For now, the travelers are still on land. The sea is still somewhere beyond the horizon, and the road is still carrying them forward. Let us pause beside that road. The sun is setting. The sky is turning soft. The fields are becoming darker. A group of travelers is resting near a small church. The church door is closed. A candle burns inside. Outside, people sit quietly. A young traveler looks at the stars. Perhaps they think about home. Perhaps they wonder what their family is doing. Perhaps they are tired. Perhaps they are still excited. Perhaps they are afraid. Perhaps they have no idea what lies ahead. But tomorrow they will walk again. And perhaps that is the simplest way to understand the movement. It was not one dramatic moment. It was thousands of small moments. Feet touching the road. Bread being broken. Water being shared. People talking. People praying. People sleeping. People waking. And then walking again. The great story was made from ordinary human actions. And slowly, those actions were carrying the travelers farther from home. As the night becomes deeper, the road disappears into darkness. The travelers sleep. The village becomes quiet. A dog barks somewhere far away. The wind moves through the trees. The stars remain above them. And far to the east, beyond mountains, rivers, and seas, Jerusalem is waiting. The young travelers believe they are moving toward it. They do not yet understand how difficult the journey will become. They do not yet know how the story will end. They do not yet know that some of them will never return home. They only know the road in front of them. And tomorrow, the road will continue. But before the journey can reach the great rivers and mountains, we need to understand another part of this story. The German movement. The young man named Nicholas. And the people who began gathering around him. Because while Stephen's followers were moving through France, another group was forming far away. And their journey would become just as important to the story of 1212. So tonight, let us leave the French travelers resting beneath the stars. Let them sleep. Let the road become quiet. Let the fire fade. And in the next chapter, we will travel eastward. We will meet Nicholas. We will enter the German lands. And we will discover how another young leader came to believe that he too had been called to lead a great journey toward Jerusalem. What would happen when these two movements grew? Would they really reach the sea? And could the impossible dream of Jerusalem become reality? The road is waiting, and the journey is only beginning. Let us leave the quiet roads of France for a little while. The French countryside is still far behind us. The young followers of Stephen are continuing their journey. But to the east, another story is beginning. The year is still 1212. And in the German lands, people are hearing a remarkable message. A young man named Nicholas is beginning to gather followers. His story is different from Stephen's, but in some ways, it sounds strangely familiar. Nicholas is young. He believes that he has received a calling. He believes that he has been chosen to lead people toward the Holy Land. And once again, the destination is Jerusalem. So tonight, let us take a slow walk into the German lands. Imagine the countryside. It is green. The hills rise gently in the distance. Forests cover large areas. Small villages sit between fields. There are winding roads. There are rivers. There are farms. There are churches. And in the distance, perhaps, a castle stands on a hill. The morning air is cool. A farmer is already working. Smoke rises from a village chimney. A bell sounds from a church. The world is beginning another ordinary day. But among these ordinary people, an unusual idea is spreading. A young man named Nicholas is speaking about Jerusalem. According to later accounts, Nicholas claimed to have received a divine message. He believed that he had been called to lead young people on a pilgrimage. The goal was not simply to travel. The goal was the Holy Land, Jerusalem, the place that had become so powerful in the religious imagination of medieval Europe. Imagine hearing about Nicholas for the first time. Perhaps you are a young person in a small village. Someone tells you that a young leader is gathering followers. They say he believes that young people have a special role. They say that God has chosen them. They say they are going to Jerusalem. You might laugh. You might doubt. Or perhaps you might become curious. You might ask, how far away is Jerusalem? Someone might answer, very far. You might ask, how will we get there? Someone might say, God will show us. That simple answer contains the heart of the movement. The travelers do not have a modern plan. They do not have a detailed route. They do not have ships waiting for them. They do not have a large supply of food. They do not have an organized military force. They have faith. And for some of them, faith may have been enough. Nicholas's movement grew. People gathered. The group became larger. And eventually, according to the traditional accounts, thousands of people were involved. Again, we should be careful with the numbers. Medieval writers sometimes gave large numbers. The exact size of the movement is uncertain. But there is enough evidence to believe that a significant movement of people did take place. And now imagine what that would have looked like. A long road. People walking. Young people. Adults. Pilgrims. Families. Perhaps religious figures. Perhaps travelers who simply wanted to see what would happen. The road is filled with footsteps. A group like this would be difficult to ignore. Villages would notice. Markets would notice. Churches would notice. Local officials would notice. People would ask questions. Who are these travelers? Where are they going? Why are there so many? And the answer would come again. Jerusalem. The word would travel with them. Jerusalem. 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 It was a word that carried enormous emotional power. To understand this, we need to imagine what Jerusalem meant to medieval Christians. Today, we can look at photographs. We can watch videos. We can use maps. We can see the streets of Jerusalem from thousands of miles away. But a medieval villager had none of this. Jerusalem was an imagined place. A place known through religious stories. A place described by pilgrims. A place seen in drawings. A place spoken about from pulpits. A place connected with sacred history. It could feel almost dreamlike. And that dream could be powerful. Imagine hearing that you might actually go there. You might see the holy city. You might pray where Jesus had walked. You might touch the places you had only heard about. For a young person, the idea could be overwhelming. And perhaps that is why the movement attracted people. But Nicholas's followers faced the same problem that Stephen's followers faced. Distance. The German lands were far from the Mediterranean. The road would take them across mountains. They would need to cross the Alps. The Alps were not a small obstacle. They were huge mountains. Today, travelers can cross them by train. They can drive through tunnels. They can fly over them. But medieval travelers had to cross them on foot or with animals. The roads could be narrow. The weather could change quickly. Snow could remain in high places. A mountain journey could be exhausting. Imagine approaching the Alps. At first, the hills rise gently. Then they become steeper. The road begins climbing. The trees change. The air becomes colder. The path becomes narrower. You look upward. The mountains seem enormous, and you are carrying everything you need. Food, clothing, perhaps a blanket, perhaps a small bag. Your feet are already tired, but you continue, because Jerusalem is still ahead. Perhaps some travelers are excited. Perhaps they are afraid. Perhaps they begin to wonder whether they made the right choice. Maybe someone says, "We can turn back." Someone else answers, "No, we must continue." And the group keeps moving, step by step, slowly, quietly. The mountains are not crossed in one day. The journey takes time. The travelers must stop. They must eat. They must sleep. They must wait for weather. They must find safe paths. And all the while, they are moving farther away from home. Think about that for a moment. Imagine being 15 years old. You have left your family. You have never traveled this far. You are now in a place where the landscape looks completely different. The language may sound different. The food may be different. The roads are unfamiliar. The mountains are enormous. And yet you are walking because you believe in something. Perhaps you believe that God is guiding you. Perhaps you believe your friends are guiding you. Perhaps you simply do not know how to stop. This is the human side of the story. Behind the legend are tired feet, cold nights, empty stomachs, homesickness, and hope. As the travelers move through the German lands, their story continues to spread. Some people may join. Others may watch them pass. Perhaps a mother sees a group of young travelers and worries. Perhaps a father hears the story and thinks it is foolish. Perhaps a priest believes the young people are sincere. Perhaps another priest thinks they are being misled. The reactions would not all be the same. The medieval church was not one single voice. Different religious leaders could have different opinions. Some could encourage pilgrimage. Others could worry about disorder. The idea of a crusade had official religious structures around it. But the movement of young people was something different. It did not fit neatly into the normal pattern. A crusade was usually organized by powerful leaders. Kings, nobles, knights, religious authorities, money, ships, weapons. But Nicholas's followers were not moving like an army. They were moving like pilgrims. They carried faith instead of armor. They carried hope instead of weapons. At least this is how the story is remembered. And perhaps the contrast was part of its appeal. The powerful had tried. The knights had tried. The kings had tried. Now the young and humble would try. This idea could feel almost magical. Imagine a medieval listener hearing such a story. They might think of biblical stories. David and Goliath, Moses and the sea, the Israelites crossing the water, the humble defeating the strong. In such a world, the idea that God could help a group of young travelers was not impossible. It might even seem natural. But faith does not remove geography. The Alps remain. The rivers remain. The roads remain. And eventually, the Mediterranean remains. The travelers will have to face all of these. But first, they need to reach Italy. And the road toward Italy is long. Imagine walking through the mountains. The air is cold. Your breath becomes visible. The path is rocky. Your feet hurt. The person beside you is quiet. Everyone is tired. The sun begins to disappear behind the mountains. You need somewhere to sleep. Perhaps there is a village ahead. Perhaps there is a monastery. Perhaps there is only a simple shelter. You walk a little farther. Then you see lights. A few warm lights in the distance. The travelers move toward them. The night becomes easier. There is food. There is water. There is somewhere to rest. The group settles down. Someone begins to pray. Someone speaks about the journey. Someone says that tomorrow they will continue. And perhaps someone asks, how much farther? Nobody really knows. The answer is always the same. Keep walking. Jerusalem is ahead. This pattern repeats. Day after day. Night after night. The movement slowly crosses the landscape. But something else is happening. The travelers are changing. Some are becoming stronger. Some are becoming tired. Some are losing faith. Some are becoming more committed. Some may turn back. Others continue. A huge movement is never made of people who all think exactly the same way. Every person has their own story. And as historians look back, these individual stories are almost impossible to recover. The sources mostly tell us about leaders and large events. They do not tell us about every ordinary person. So when we imagine the journey, we should remember the silent majority. The young people whose names are unknown. The parents who worried. The villagers who offered food. The people who refused. The merchants who watched. The priests who questioned. The travelers who joined for a short time. All of them were part of the world through which the movement passed. And then there were the people who had no connection with the movement at all. They were simply living their lives. Farming, trading, cooking, praying, raising children, going to markets, repairing roofs, feeding animals. The world did not stop because the travelers were walking. This is an important thing to remember. History books sometimes make events seem like the entire world was focused on them. But ordinary life continues. A farmer still has to harvest wheat. A baker still has to bake bread. A mother still has to prepare food. A blacksmith still has to repair tools. Children still play. People still fall in love. People still become sick. People still die. The children's crusade was important to the people involved. But it was only one part of a much larger world. And that larger world continued moving around them. Now imagine the travelers approaching the end of the mountains. The landscape begins to change. The air becomes warmer. The roads become wider. The hills begin to soften. And somewhere ahead is Italy. Italy is not yet the modern country we know. It is a land divided among different political powers. Cities have their own governments. Kings and emperors compete for influence. Church authorities have enormous power. Merchants control important trade routes. The travelers are entering a complicated political landscape. But perhaps they do not care about politics. They care about Jerusalem. They continue. Soon they reach Italian towns. The atmosphere changes. The architecture changes. The language changes. The food changes. The travelers are now much farther from their homes. Imagine entering a busy Italian town in the 13th century. The streets are crowded. Merchants are selling goods. Horses move through narrow streets. People speak loudly. Church bells ring. Markets are full. The smell of bread and cooked food fills the air. The travelers enter. People stare. Some are curious. Some may welcome them. Others may simply want them to move along. The young travelers are becoming a sight. People talk about them. News spreads. A large group has come from the north. They say they are going to Jerusalem. They believe they have been called. They are young. They have no army. They have little money. And yet they continue. Perhaps people wonder what will happen. Perhaps some believe a miracle is coming. Perhaps others quietly shake their heads. The movement continues south, toward the Mediterranean, toward the sea. And the closer they come, the more important the question becomes. How will they cross? They have walked across land, but the Holy Land lies across water. They need ships. Ships cost money. Sailors need payment. Food is needed for the voyage. The journey across the sea is dangerous, and there is no guarantee that anyone will help. This is where the dream begins to meet reality. Imagine standing beside the Mediterranean for the first time. The sea stretches before you. It seems endless. The horizon is a straight line. The water moves gently. Ships rise and fall with the waves. The air smells of salt. You have never seen anything like it. Behind you are mountains and roads. Ahead is the sea. And beyond that sea is the Holy Land. Jerusalem. Perhaps some of the young travelers feel excitement. Perhaps some feel fear. Perhaps some feel disappointment. The sea does not look like a path. It looks like a wall made of water. And the question becomes simple. What happens now? The traditional stories tell us that the young travelers believed the sea would somehow open, that God would make a path, that their faith would be rewarded. But we must be careful. The surviving sources do not give us one simple, reliable account of what every traveler believed. Some later stories may have developed around the idea. Still, the image became powerful. Young people standing before the sea, waiting for a miracle, waiting for the waters to part, waiting for a path to Jerusalem. It is one of the most memorable images connected with the children's crusade. But before we reach the ships, we need to slow down. Because the journey from the German lands to Italy has already changed the travelers. They have crossed mountains. They have traveled through unfamiliar communities. They have walked for days and weeks. Some may have gone home. Some may have become separated. Some may have continued. The group that finally reaches Italy may not be the same group that first left home. People disappear from movements. People join movements. Crowds change. And this is especially true when the journey is long. So the word children becomes even more complicated. By the time the travelers reached Italy, they were not necessarily one giant group of small children. The movement had changed. It had spread. It had separated. It had gathered again. Different people had different experiences. Some may have traveled only part of the way. Some may have remained behind. Some may have died. Some may have found work. Some may have returned home. Some may have continued toward the coast. History cannot tell us the fate of every individual. And perhaps that uncertainty is something we should accept. We do not need to fill every blank with a story. Sometimes a blank must remain a blank. Sometimes the most honest answer is simply, we do not know. The travelers themselves could not know how their story would be remembered. They were simply living through it. One day at a time. One road at a time. One meal at a time. One night at a time. And now the sea is ahead. The Mediterranean. Wide. Blue. Moving constantly. The young travelers stand near its shore. They have come a very long way. Behind them are the villages of northern Europe. Behind them are the fields, the forests, the mountains, the rivers, the homes they once knew. Ahead is the sea, and beyond the sea is the place they have been dreaming about. Jerusalem. The sun begins to fall. The water catches the last light. The travelers sit quietly. Some speak. Some pray. Some simply watch the waves. The wind moves across the shore. A ship is visible in the distance. It rises gently and falls again. Perhaps someone points toward it. Perhaps they wonder if that ship could carry them. Perhaps they begin asking questions. Who owns it? Where is it going? How much would it cost? Can it take all of us? Nobody has easy answers. The dream has reached the edge of the land. Now reality is waiting. And the next part of the story will take us to the Mediterranean ports, to the ships, to the merchants, to the sailors, and to the difficult question of how a huge group of poor young pilgrims could possibly cross the sea. As night falls over the coast, the travelers settle down once again. The fire is small. The sea is dark. The stars appear above the water. The waves move gently toward the shore. The travelers are exhausted, but perhaps they are also hopeful. Tomorrow they will look toward the sea again. Tomorrow they will wonder if the miracle will happen. Tomorrow they will have to decide what to do next. For now, though, let us leave them beside the Mediterranean. Listen to the waves. Listen to the wind. Let the distant voices fade. And imagine the young travelers looking toward the dark horizon. They have walked so far. They have come this far. But the greatest obstacle is still in front of them. The sea. Would the waters really open for them? Would they find ships? Would they reach Jerusalem? Or would the dream begin to fall apart at the shoreline? As the night grows quiet, we will leave those questions waiting beside the sea. And in the next chapter, we will follow the travelers into the Italian ports and discover what happened when their great journey finally met the Mediterranean. The road has ended. The sea has begun. And the story is about to change. The night beside the Mediterranean is quiet. The travelers are resting. Some are asleep. Some are still awake. The sound of the waves moves gently through the darkness. Again and again, the water reaches the shore. Then it slips away. Then it returns. The young travelers have spent so long walking. Now they are standing before something they cannot cross on foot. The sea. For many of them, this may be the first time they have ever seen such a vast body of water. Imagine standing there. The land behind you. The water in front of you. The horizon stretching so far that you cannot see where the sea ends. A few ships move slowly in the distance. Their sails are small against the enormous sky. You look at them. You think about Jerusalem. It is somewhere beyond that water. The journey has brought you all the way here. But now you need a ship. And a ship is not something you can simply find and take. Ships belong to people. Merchants, sailors, ship owners, ports, governments, and ships are valuable. They carry goods. They carry people. They carry food. They travel between distant lands. A large group of poor pilgrims cannot simply walk onto a ship and expect to be carried across the sea. Someone has to pay. Someone has to organize the journey. Someone has to provide food and water. And someone has to know where the ship is going. The travelers may have had little understanding of these practical problems when they first left home. They had imagined the journey as a religious mission. But now they were facing the hard reality of travel. Faith could tell them where they wanted to go. It could not build a ship. It could not fill a ship with food. It could not guarantee a safe voyage, and it could not make the sea disappear. Still, the traditional stories tell us that some believed a miracle would happen. The sea would open. The water would move aside. A dry road would appear, just as in the story of Moses. Imagine the hope in that idea. You have walked across Europe. You have crossed roads and rivers. You have crossed mountains. You have survived cold nights. You have survived hunger. You have left your home far behind. And now you believe that God will finish the journey for you. Perhaps you stand beside the water and wait. The waves continue. Nothing happens. You wait a little longer. Still nothing. The sun moves across the sky. The water continues to move. The sea remains the sea. For a believer, this moment could be confusing. Perhaps the miracle will happen tomorrow. Perhaps there is another path. Perhaps someone has misunderstood the message. Perhaps the journey needs to continue in another way. These are the kinds of questions that human beings ask when reality does not match expectation. And this is where the story of the children's crusade becomes difficult. The medieval sources do not give us one simple account. There are different stories, different dates, different numbers, different details. Some accounts were written years after the events. Some were written by people who were not present. Some may have repeated stories they had heard from others. So historians have to be careful. The famous image of children waiting for the sea to part may not describe exactly what happened. It may be a later version of a more complicated event. But something important did happen around the Mediterranean. The travelers needed ships, and the question was whether they could get them. Let us imagine one of the ports. The streets are busy. Merchants move through the market. Sailors carry ropes and sacks. Wooden carts move toward the docks. The smell of fish fills the air. Barrels are stacked near warehouses. People shout to one another. The sea is busy with movement. Ships arrive. Ships leave. Goods are loaded. Goods are unloaded. And among all this ordinary activity, a large group of young pilgrims arrives. People notice them. They are unusual. They have traveled a long way. They are not dressed like soldiers. They do not look wealthy. They are travelers, pilgrims, people who want to cross the sea. Imagine a merchant watching them. Perhaps he wonders where they came from. Perhaps he hears that they have walked from northern Europe. He might find that difficult to believe. A journey that long would be exhausting, even for experienced travelers. And now these young people want to go farther. Across the sea, toward the Holy Land. Perhaps the merchant shakes his head. Perhaps he thinks they are foolish. Perhaps he thinks there is money to be made. The port is a place where everything has a price. Food has a price. Rooms have a price. Transportation has a price. Ships have a price. The travelers need all of these things. And they have limited money. This is where the difference between a pilgrimage and an army becomes very clear. A wealthy crusading army could raise money. Kings could provide ships. Nobles could pay for supplies. Merchants could be contracted. But a poor popular movement did not have the same resources. The young travelers were dependent on charity. They were dependent on strangers. They were dependent on the willingness of ship owners to help. And this made them vulnerable. Still they waited. Perhaps they prayed. Perhaps they sang religious songs. Perhaps they talked among themselves. Perhaps they simply watched the sea. Imagine the evening. The sun begins to disappear. The port becomes quieter. The bright colors of the market fade. The sky turns pale. The sea becomes darker. The travelers gather near one another. Someone distributes bread. Someone drinks water. Someone tries to find a place to sleep. A few people may find shelter. Others may sleep outside. The sea continues to move beside them. It does not care about their journey. The waves come and go. The moon rises. And somewhere far away, their families may be wondering where they are. Think about that. A mother in France may not know where her child is. A father in Germany may not know whether his son has reached the mountains. A brother or sister may be waiting for someone who may never return. Medieval communication was slow. There were no instant messages. A family could wait weeks or months for news. Sometimes there was no news at all. This makes long journeys even more difficult to imagine. When someone left home, the people they left behind could not simply follow their progress. They had to wait and hope. Perhaps a traveler would return one day. Perhaps someone would bring news. Perhaps a letter would arrive. Perhaps nothing would arrive. The uncertainty could be painful. But the travelers were now far away. They had entered another world. The port city was full of strangers, and they needed a way across the water. The story of the children's crusade is often told as though the travelers simply arrived at the sea and waited for a miracle. But real life is usually more complicated. Some travelers may have found ships. Some may have remained in Italy. Some may have turned back. Some may have continued traveling. Some may have become separated from the larger group. The movement was not one solid mass. It was changing all the time. People were constantly joining and leaving. And this is something we should remember whenever we hear a large number attached to the story. Thousands may have been connected with the movement, but that does not mean thousands remain together every day. A large crowd can break apart. A road can divide it. A village can absorb some people. Illness can remove others. Hunger can send people home. Fear can change someone's mind. And distance can separate people without anyone knowing exactly where they went. This is how human journeys work. They are messy. They are unpredictable. They do not follow a neat line. And the children's crusade was no different. Now let us imagine one of the young travelers sitting beside the water. Perhaps the traveler is exhausted. The feet are sore. The clothes are dusty. The face is tired. The journey has already been much longer than expected. Perhaps the traveler thinks about home. A familiar room. A familiar bed. A familiar voice. Perhaps there was a family meal. Perhaps there was a small garden. Perhaps there was a favorite tree. Perhaps there was a friend. All of that seems very far away now. And yet the traveler remains, because the dream is still alive. Jerusalem. Perhaps the young traveler has never doubted it. Perhaps doubt is beginning now. This is one of the quiet moments that legends often leave out. The moment when a person wonders whether they can continue. The moment when the great dream becomes heavy. The moment when the journey becomes real. A person can dream about Jerusalem. Walking there is different. Crossing Europe is different. Crossing the sea is different again. The distance between dream and reality is enormous. And the travelers are standing directly on that line. Behind them is the road. Ahead is the sea. The future is uncertain. Let us stay here for a moment. Listen to the water. The waves are gentle tonight. The air is cool. The stars are bright. The port is quiet. Perhaps somewhere nearby, A sailor is repairing a rope. Perhaps a dog is sleeping beside a doorway. Perhaps a fisherman is pulling his boat farther onto the shore. Ordinary life continues, and the young pilgrims wait. Eventually, ships become part of the story. According to later accounts, ship owners agreed to carry some of the travelers. This is one of the most important points in the traditional story. The pilgrims needed transportation. Some ships were available, and some of the young travelers were able to board. But again, the story is not as simple as the famous legend sometimes suggests. There was no magical fleet waiting specifically for them. There was no guaranteed passage. There was no simple route directly to Jerusalem. The Mediterranean was a dangerous and complicated world. Ships could be delayed. Storms could appear. Routes could change. Sailors needed to know where they were going. And different ports belonged to different political powers. The sea was a world of its own. Imagine stepping onto a medieval ship. The deck is wooden. The space is limited. There is no comfortable passenger cabin like on a modern ship. The smell of salt water mixes with the smell of rope, wood, food, and people. The ship moves with the waves. At first, perhaps it feels exciting. The land begins to move away. The port becomes smaller. The shoreline becomes a thin line. Then the ship turns toward the open water. Now there is water in every direction. For someone who has never traveled by sea, this could be frightening. The horizon is enormous. The ship rises and falls. The wind changes. The waves move. There is nowhere to walk. There is nowhere to escape. You are simply on the water. And somewhere ahead is another shore. But what shore? Where exactly will the ship go? How long will it take? Will the weather remain calm? Will there be enough food? These questions become important. A sea journey is not just a larger version of a road journey. It is completely different. On land, if you become tired, you can stop. On a ship, you cannot simply stop in the middle of the sea. On land, if you run out of water, you can search for a well. At sea, fresh water must be carried. On land, if you become frightened, you can turn around. At sea, you must depend on the ship. The travelers are now completely dependent on the sailors. And the sailors understand the sea in ways the pilgrims do not. They know the winds. They know the coastlines. They know the ports. They know the dangers. For the young travelers, the sea must have felt enormous. Perhaps some were excited. Perhaps some were sick. Perhaps some prayed. Perhaps some watched the horizon without speaking. Imagine the first evening aboard the ship. The sun goes down. The sea becomes dark. The ship continues moving. The stars appear. There is no village. No church bell. No road. Only water. The travelers sit quietly. Perhaps someone begins a prayer. Others join. The sound is soft. The wind carries the voices across the deck. The sea continues. And perhaps one young traveler looks toward the horizon and thinks, Jerusalem. The destination still feels real. But the journey has become uncertain. Now, the traditional accounts begin to describe events that are difficult to separate from legend. Some sources say that ships carried groups of the young travelers. Some accounts say that storms struck. Some say ships were wrecked. Others connect the travelers with Sardinia. The details vary. And this is where we need to slow down again. History is not always a story with perfect answers. Sometimes we have several accounts that do not agree. When that happens, we should not choose the most dramatic version simply because it sounds interesting. We should look at the evidence. We should ask what the sources actually say. And we should admit when something is uncertain. What seems clear is that the movement did not result in the young travelers reaching Jerusalem in the way they had hoped. The dream of a great march into the Holy Land did not become reality. Some groups may have reached Mediterranean ports. Some people may have traveled by ship. Some may have gone to Italy. Some may have remained there. Others may have returned home. And some may have disappeared from the historical record completely. This is perhaps the most important lesson of the story. The beginning is famous. The ending is much less clear. The journey does not end with a triumphant arrival in Jerusalem. There is no grand moment where the young travelers enter the holy city together. Instead, the movement slowly breaks apart. And that process would take us into another part of medieval life. Life after the dream. Life after the journey. Life when a person has traveled far from home and has to decide what to do next. But before we reach that point, let us remain beside the sea. Imagine the shoreline at sunset. The water is calm. A few ships are anchored nearby. The travelers sit together. Some are talking. Some are silent. Some may be praying. The sun touches the water. The sky turns soft. The mountains in the distance become dark shapes. The great dream of Jerusalem remains somewhere beyond the horizon. Perhaps some still believe they will reach it. Perhaps others are beginning to doubt. Perhaps nobody knows what tomorrow will bring. This is the moment when the story feels very human. Not like a legend. Not like a grand historical event. Just a group of tired people standing beside a sea. They have traveled farther than they ever imagined. They have left their homes. They have followed a dream. And now they are waiting. The sea moves. The wind moves. The sun disappears. And the night arrives. Perhaps a young traveler lies down on the shore. The sand is cool. The sound of the waves is steady. In the darkness, the traveler may remember home. Perhaps the memory is clear. Perhaps it feels distant. Perhaps the traveler wonders whether they will ever see it again. There is something quiet and sad about that thought. The journey began with hope. But long journeys can change people. They can make a person older. They can make a person tired. They can make a person question what they once believed. And they can teach a person that the world is much larger than the village where they grew up. The young travelers have learned this already. They have seen roads they never knew existed. They have seen mountains. They have seen cities. They have seen the sea. Their world has become larger. Even if they never reach Jerusalem, they are no longer the same people who left home. That is true of many journeys. Sometimes the destination changes. Sometimes the destination is never reached. But the journey still changes the traveler. And so, as the waves move gently against the shore, let us leave the travelers here for a while. The Mediterranean is dark. The stars are above. The ships rest in the water. The fires along the coast grow smaller. The great roads of Europe are far behind. The Holy Land is still far ahead. And the story now begins to move into its saddest and most uncertain part. Because not everyone who left home would return home. Some would remain in foreign lands. Some would become separated from their companions. Some would disappear from history. And some would become part of stories that later writers would tell in very different ways. The children's crusade would not end with a glorious victory. It would become something much quieter. A movement that slowly faded. A dream that did not happen as its followers imagined. A journey that left behind questions. But before we close tonight's chapter, let us listen once more to the sea. The waves are slow. The wind is soft. The travelers are resting. Perhaps one small fire is still burning. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone else is already asleep. The night passes, and far away, beyond the water, Jerusalem remains. A city they have dreamed about. A city they may never see. And as the night grows deeper, we can almost imagine the old road behind them. The fields, the villages, the forests, the mountains, all of them now part of memory. The journey has reached the sea, but the story is not finished. There are still people waiting. There are still travelers trying to find their way home. There are still stories being told. And there is still the question of what really happened to the people who followed Stephen and Nicholas. So let us rest here beside the Mediterranean. Let the waves continue their quiet rhythm. Let the night become still. And when we return, we will follow the travelers after the great dream begins to break apart. We will look at what happened to the different groups. We will explore the stories of ships, ports, and separation. And we will begin to understand why the Children's Crusade became such a mysterious part of medieval history. For now, the sea is quiet. The road is silent. The travelers are sleeping, and the stars remain above them. The journey continues. But where will it take them next? The Mediterranean is still quiet. The night air is cool. The waves move gently against the shore. And somewhere along the coast, the travelers who have come so far are resting. They have reached the sea, but they have not reached Jerusalem. This is an important difference. The dream was always simple. Walk toward the Holy Land. Reach the sea. Find a way across. Arrive in Jerusalem. But real journeys are rarely so simple. And now the travelers are beginning to discover this. The road that once seemed to point clearly toward Jerusalem is becoming uncertain. There are ships. There are ports. There are different groups. There are different stories. And there are many people who do not know what will happen next. So tonight, let us stay beside the Mediterranean for a little longer. Let us watch the morning arrive. The darkness slowly becomes gray. The stars disappear. A pale light appears over the water. The sea changes color. The travelers begin to wake. Some sit up slowly. Some rub their eyes. Some gather their clothing. Others remain asleep. The journey has made them tired. Very tired. For many of them, this is not simply another morning. They are far from home. They are standing beside a sea they may never have seen before. They have no clear path ahead. And some may already understand that reaching Jerusalem will not be easy. Perhaps a few travelers are asking questions. Where are the ships? Who will take us? How much will it cost? When will we leave? Where will we land? What happens when we arrive? These are ordinary questions. But nobody has ordinary answers. The travelers are depending on other people. And that makes them vulnerable. A merchant can choose whether to help. A ship owner can choose whether to carry them. A local ruler can choose whether to allow them into a town. A wealthy person can choose whether to give them food. The young travelers have very little control over what happens next. This is something that is easy to forget when we hear the romantic version of the story. We imagine a great crowd moving with confidence. But a crowd can be powerful and powerless at the same time. It can look enormous from the outside. Yet every individual person still needs food. Every individual person needs water. Every individual person needs somewhere to sleep. Every individual person can become sick. Every individual person can become frightened. and every individual person can decide to leave. So the great movement begins to separate. Some people remain together. Some move ahead. Some fall behind. Some look for work. Some try to return home. Others continue toward the ports. And slowly the great crowd becomes smaller. Imagine a road after a large festival. At first, thousands of people may be together. Then the crowd begins to disappear. One group turns left. Another group turns right. Some people stop at a village. Some go home. Some stay behind. By evening, only a fraction of the original crowd may remain. Something similar can happen during a long pilgrimage. People separate naturally. The journey becomes a collection of smaller journeys. And this is likely one reason the surviving stories are so difficult to understand. Different travelers experience different things. One group may have seen one port. Another may have reached another. One person may have returned home. Another may have remained in Italy. Another may have disappeared entirely. Later writers gathered these stories together. Over time, they became one great story, the Children's Crusade. But behind that title were many separate human journeys. Let us imagine one of those smaller groups. Perhaps there are 20 travelers. They have been walking together for weeks. They know one another. They share food. They sleep near one another. They have become companions. Now they reach a town. The group stops. One traveler says they should continue toward the coast. Another says they should remain. Someone else says they should find a ship. A fourth person wants to return home. The group becomes uncertain. Nobody wants to abandon the dream. But the dream is becoming harder to follow. Perhaps one young traveler asks, "Will we really get to Jerusalem?" There is silence. Nobody answers immediately. Then someone says, "We must trust God." It is a comforting answer, but it does not solve the practical problem. The sea is still there. The ship is still needed. The money is still needed. And the Holy Land is still far away. This is the moment when faith meets reality. And sometimes reality is very quiet. There is no great battle. No dramatic scene. Just a group of tired travelers standing in a town, trying to decide what to do. This is how many historical events really happen. Not with one great moment, but through hundreds of small decisions. One person stays. One person leaves. One person waits. Another person walks away. A group becomes smaller. And eventually, the movement changes completely. There were also adults connected with the journey. This matters because the name Children's Crusade can create a misleading picture. The movement was not simply made up of very young children traveling alone. There were older people. There were families. There were religious figures. There were ordinary adults. There were different kinds of travelers. The word children in medieval accounts could have a broader meaning than we might expect today. It could refer to young people. It could also be used in a religious or symbolic sense. So historians have to be careful. When we imagine the movement, we should not picture a modern school group. It was much more complicated. It was a popular religious movement made up of people of different ages. Some were young. Some were older. Some were probably children. And some may have joined for reasons that had little to do with religion. Perhaps they wanted to travel. Perhaps they wanted to escape difficult lives. Perhaps they wanted to follow friends. Perhaps they believed deeply. Perhaps they simply wanted to see what would happen. Human beings rarely have only one reason for doing something. And the travelers of 1212 were no different. Now imagine a young traveler sitting near the harbor. The sun is warm. The sea is bright. A fishing boat moves slowly across the water. The traveler watches it. Perhaps they have never been this close to a ship before. The boat looks small from a distance, but even a small ship can carry people across the sea. Maybe hope returns. Perhaps there is still a way. Perhaps a ship owner will help. Perhaps someone will pay. Perhaps the group can find a passage. The traveler stands, walks toward the harbor, and asks. The answer is not what they hoped. The ship is full. Another ship is too expensive. Another is not going in the right direction. Another will not leave for several days. The traveler walks back. The group waits. This may happen again. And again. Days pass. Perhaps weeks. The travelers are still waiting. Food becomes more difficult. Money becomes smaller. People become restless. Some leave. Others remain. This is the slow breaking apart of the dream. It does not happen all at once. It happens gradually. And while all of this is happening, stories about the travelers continue to spread. People tell stories about the young pilgrims. Some say they are blessed. Some say they are foolish. Some say they have been deceived. Some say a miracle will happen. The stories become larger, and later generations will make them larger still. This is one reason the Children's Crusade has such a strange place in history. It stands somewhere between documented events and medieval legend. The movement itself was real, but many of the details surrounding it became uncertain. Imagine a story being told in one village. A traveler says, "I saw thousands of young people. Perhaps there were hundreds." But to the traveler, the crowd seemed enormous. Someone else hears the story. They tell another person. That person writes it down. A later writer reads the account. Then another writer copies it. A century passes. Another writer repeats the story. Now the number has become even larger. The story grows. This is how legends can develop. It does not require someone to deliberately lie. People remember differently. People misunderstand. People exaggerate. People simplify. And writers often prefer a dramatic story to a complicated one. The Children's Crusade had all the ingredients for a legend. Young people, a holy mission, a distant city, a divine message, a miraculous hope, a dangerous journey, the sea, and a mysterious ending. It was almost impossible for medieval storytellers to ignore. So the stories grew. But tonight, we are interested in the people behind those stories. The real travelers, the tired travelers, the hungry travelers, the hopeful travelers, the frightened travelers, people who had left their homes believing they were doing something important. Perhaps some of them never understood how their journey would be remembered. Perhaps they thought of it simply as a pilgrimage. Perhaps they thought they would return home. Perhaps they never imagined that historians 800 years later would still be asking questions about them. Now let us return to the coast. The sun is setting again. The travelers have spent another day waiting. A few ships are visible. The water is orange beneath the evening light. People sit quietly. Someone breaks bread. Someone shares a little water. Someone tells a story from home. The word home feels different now. Home is far away, but the memory of home is still strong. A young traveler remembers a familiar field. Perhaps there was a stream beside it. Perhaps there was a tree. Perhaps there was a small house. Perhaps a family member used to call their name from the doorway. These memories become precious when a person is far away. Imagine lying beneath the stars in a foreign land. You can see the same moon you saw at home, but everything beneath it is different. The language, the roads, the buildings, the food, the people. You are far away. And perhaps for the first time, you understand how large the world really is. The journey has changed your sense of distance. A village that once seemed like the whole world now seems very small. The mountains you once imagined as enormous are now behind you. The sea is in front of you, and somewhere beyond it is another world. But perhaps the journey is already asking too much. Some travelers begin to turn back. Imagine the decision. You have walked for weeks. You have followed your friends. You have believed in the mission. But now you are tired. You miss your family. You do not know when you will reach Jerusalem. You do not know whether you can cross the sea. Perhaps you decide to go home. There is no shame in this. But turning back is not easy either. The road home is long. You may not know the way. You may have no money. You may be alone. Perhaps you must join another group of travelers. Perhaps you work for food. Perhaps you depend on strangers. A journey can become difficult in both directions. Some travelers may have remained in Italy because returning was too difficult. Others may have found work. Others may have entered religious communities. Others may have disappeared into local populations. And this is one of the reasons we cannot give a simple ending to the children's crusade. There was no single ending. There were many endings. For some, the journey ended at the sea. For others, it ended in an Italian town. For others, it ended on a ship. For others, it ended when they finally reached home. For some, it may have ended with death. We simply do not know the fate of everyone. And perhaps that uncertainty is one of the quietest parts of the story. History does not always give us closure. Sometimes people simply disappear. Their names are not recorded. Their final days are unknown. Their families may never have learned exactly what happened. Imagine a family waiting for news. A year passes. Then another. No letter arrives. No traveler returns. The family does not know. Perhaps they hope. Perhaps they pray. Perhaps eventually they accept that the person is gone. That kind of uncertainty was common in the medieval world. Travel was dangerous. Communication was slow. People could disappear without leaving much evidence behind. And yet, their absence could remain in a family for generations. Now let us turn toward the German movement again. Nicholas and his followers had traveled south. They had crossed the Alps. They had reached Italy. But their journey did not lead to Jerusalem. Instead, the movement began to break apart. Some followers continued. Some stopped. Some returned. And Nicholas himself became part of a story that later writers remembered differently. His movement is one of the great mysteries of 1212. We know that a popular movement existed. We know that large numbers of people were involved. But the exact details are difficult to reconstruct. This is where historians have to work carefully. They compare sources. They examine when each source was written. They ask whether the writer was close to the events. They look for details that appear in several independent accounts. And slowly, they try to separate what is likely from what may be later legend. It is a little like trying to rebuild an old house from pieces of wood. Some pieces are strong. Some are broken. Some do not fit. Some may belong to another house entirely. But if enough pieces survive, you can still see the shape. The children's crusade is like that. The shape is visible. The details are not always clear. And perhaps that is why the story remains fascinating. It is not simply a story we know. It is a story we are still trying to understand. Let us pause here. The night has returned. The Mediterranean is dark. The waves are steady. A small group of travelers sleeps near the shore. Some have already left. Some are preparing to leave. Some are waiting for ships. Some are thinking about home. The great movement that once seemed to be growing larger is now beginning to shrink. But far away, people are still talking. The story is traveling faster than the people themselves. That is one of the strange things about history. Sometimes the story of an event becomes larger after the event itself has begun to disappear. The travelers may be tired and uncertain, but the legend is beginning to grow. And the legend will survive for centuries. People will tell stories about children marching toward Jerusalem. They will tell stories about miracles. They will tell stories about the sea. They will tell stories about ships. They will tell stories about betrayal. Some of those stories will be true. Some will be partly true. Some will be difficult to verify. And some may be completely wrong. But all of them will become part of the memory of 1212. Now imagine the sea once more. The moon is reflected on the water. The shore is quiet. The travelers are resting. The sound of the waves is almost like breathing. In and out. In and out. The journey has slowed. The great dream has become uncertain. But the story is not finished. There is still much to understand. Because while the travelers were making their way across Europe, something else was happening in the wider world. The Crusades themselves were changing. The political world around Jerusalem was changing. The relationship between kings, churches, and crusaders was changing. And ordinary people were living with memories of earlier crusades. All of this shaped the way people thought about the Holy Land. It shaped what they believed was possible. And it helped create the world in which the children's crusade could happen. So before we continue deeper into the ending of the movement, we will need to step back. We will look at the crusades that came before 1212. We will remember the great journeys of kings and knights. We will think about how stories of those journeys reached ordinary families. And we will see why Jerusalem became such a powerful dream for people who had never seen it. For now, though, let the sea remain quiet. Let the travelers rest. The road has been long. The night is deep. And tomorrow brings another part of the story. The children's crusade has reached a turning point. The travelers are no longer simply moving forward. They are beginning to scatter. Some are going home. Some are staying behind. Some are continuing. And some will vanish from the record forever. But one question remains. If the journey did not succeed, why did the story become so famous? Why did people continue telling it? And why, more than 800 years later, are we still wondering what really happened? As the waves move softly against the shore, we will leave that question waiting. And in the next chapter, we will slowly step backward in time and explore the earlier Crusades, the history of Jerusalem, and the religious world that made the dream of the Holy Land so powerful. For now, close your eyes if you wish. Imagine the quiet shore, the dark water, the distant lights of the port, and the travelers sleeping beneath the stars. The journey may be breaking apart, but the story is only beginning to reveal its deeper meaning. The night is quiet now. The sea is far behind us. The travelers have been resting along the coast. Some have gone home. Some have remained. Some are still searching for a way forward. And while their journey slowly begins to fade, we are going to take a gentle step backward. Before we continue with the travelers, we need to understand the place they were trying to reach. Jerusalem. Why was this city so important? Why would a young person leave home? Why would families allow their children to travel? Why would people walk across mountains and fields? Why would they risk hunger, exhaustion, and uncertainty? To understand the children's crusade, we need to understand Jerusalem. So tonight, let us take a slow walk through the history of this ancient city. Imagine the city from far away. The sun is beginning to rise. The hills are soft in the morning light. Stone walls surround the city. Narrow roads lead toward its gates. People move slowly through the streets. Merchants prepare their shops. Travelers arrive from distant places. Religious pilgrims walk toward holy sites. The city is old, very old. Its history reaches back thousands of years. Long before the year 1212. Long before the medieval crusades. Long before the travelers we have been following. Jerusalem had already been important to many generations. For Christians, Jerusalem was deeply connected with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. For Jews, the city had an even older sacred history. For Muslims, Jerusalem was also an important holy city. By the medieval period, its religious importance was enormous. But the people of Europe did not necessarily know the city in the way we think about cities today. Many had never seen it. They may never have met anyone who had seen it. They knew Jerusalem through stories, through church teachings, through religious art, through prayers, through the words of priests, through the stories of pilgrims who returned from the East. For an ordinary farmer in Northern Europe, Jerusalem could feel almost like another world. A distant city at the edge of imagination. Imagine living in a small medieval village. You wake before sunrise. You work in the fields. You eat simple food. You know the nearby roads. You know the next village. Perhaps you have traveled a few days away. But beyond that, the world becomes uncertain. Then someone tells you about Jerusalem. They describe a city far away. A city where Jesus lived. A city where important events in Christian history happened. A city where sacred places can be visited. You listen. Perhaps you have never seen a map. Perhaps you cannot read. Perhaps the only way you know about distant places is through stories. So Jerusalem becomes an idea. A holy place. A place of memory. A place of faith. And when someone says, "We are going there," the idea can become powerful. The word itself can create an image in the mind. Jerusalem, a city of stone, a city of churches, a city of ancient walls, a city connected with the story of Jesus, a city where heaven and earth seem close. This is the Jerusalem imagined by many medieval Christians. It was not simply a political city. It was a spiritual destination. And that is important, because the Crusades were never only about land. Religion was at the center of the way many people understood them. The First Crusade had begun more than a century before the Children's Crusade. In 1095, Pope Urban II called for a military expedition to the east. His message encouraged Christians to travel to the Holy Land. The response was enormous. Knights joined. Nobles joined. Ordinary people joined. Thousands traveled east. They crossed Europe. They crossed difficult lands. They eventually reached Jerusalem. And in 1099, crusading armies captured the city. For medieval Christians, this became a powerful memory. The holy city had been reached. The journey had succeeded. The story of that success would be told for generations. But the political situation did not remain stable. Muslim rulers continued to control large parts of the region. Crusader states were created. Wars continued. New crusades were called. The Second Crusade came. Then the Third. And during the Third Crusade, one of the most famous figures of medieval history became involved. Richard the Lionheart. He fought against Saladin. Saladin was the powerful Muslim ruler who had captured Jerusalem in 1187. The loss of Jerusalem shocked many Christians in Europe. Imagine hearing that news in a medieval village. Jerusalem has fallen. The holy city is no longer under Christian control. People might feel grief, anger, fear, and sadness. Churches would speak about the situation. Preachers would tell stories. Letters would carry news. The idea of another crusade would become important. Kings and nobles would discuss war. Knights would prepare. And ordinary people would hear about the struggle. The Third Crusade followed. Richard fought Saladin. There were battles. There were negotiations. There were marches. There were long periods of waiting. But Richard did not retake Jerusalem. Instead, agreements were reached. Christian pilgrims were allowed access to holy places under certain conditions. But the city itself remained under Muslim control. This mattered deeply, because Jerusalem remained the great destination. The city was still there. The holy places were still there. The dream remained. And in the early 13th century, another crusade was launched. The Fourth Crusade. This crusade began only a few years before the Children's Crusade. And it would take a very different path. Instead of reaching Jerusalem, the Crusaders became involved in political and financial struggles. In 1204, they captured Constantinople. This was a Christian city. The Crusaders attacked fellow Christians. They looted the city. They created a new political order. For many people, this was shocking. The crusading movement had become complicated. It was no longer simply Christians traveling toward Jerusalem. Politics had become deeply involved. Money mattered. Trade mattered. Power mattered. And ordinary people could hear about all of this. But what did they understand? That is difficult to know. A farmer in a distant village might hear only the basic story. There had been a crusade. The Crusaders had traveled. The Holy Land was still important. Jerusalem was still sacred. Another crusade might come. This was the world in which the Children's Crusade emerged. The idea of crusade had become part of European culture. People had heard the stories for generations. They knew that Christians were expected to care about the Holy Land. They heard sermons. They saw religious images. They watched crusaders leave. They saw families say goodbye. They heard stories about people who never returned. The Crusades were not distant in the same way we might think of a historical event today. They were part of living memory. Grandfathers could remember earlier crusades. Fathers could tell their children stories. Churches could preach about the Holy Land. The idea was everywhere. And this helps us understand why a young person might believe that they too could go. The crusade was already a familiar idea. But the Children's Crusade added something unusual. The leaders were young. The followers were young. The movement was not built around knights. It was built around ordinary people. And perhaps that is why the idea felt so powerful. The powerful had tried. The knights had tried. The kings had tried. What if the innocent could succeed? What if God wanted the young? What if Jerusalem could be reached through faith rather than weapons? These ideas may have been part of the movement's emotional power. But there was another important part of medieval Christianity: the idea of pilgrimage. Pilgrimage was common. People traveled to holy places for many reasons. Some wanted to pray. Some wanted forgiveness. Some wanted healing. Some wanted to fulfill a promise. Some wanted to give thanks. Some wanted to seek help from a saint. A pilgrimage could be difficult. People might walk for days or weeks. They might sleep in monasteries. They might depend on charity. They might carry walking staffs. They might wear special clothing. They might travel in groups. The journey itself was considered meaningful. The suffering of the journey could have religious value. Walking long distances could be an act of devotion. This is important because the Children's Crusade was not simply a military campaign. For many participants, it may have felt like a pilgrimage. They were traveling toward a holy place. They were leaving ordinary life behind. They were accepting hardship. They were trusting God. In that sense, the journey itself was part of the religious experience. Imagine walking through the countryside. Your feet hurt. Your clothes are dirty. You are hungry. The road seems endless. But you believe that every step matters. Every step brings you closer to the holy place. That belief can make hardship easier to accept. The medieval Christian world was full of such ideas. People believed that physical suffering could have spiritual meaning. They believed that prayer mattered. They believed that sacred places mattered. They believed that saints could help. They believed that miracles were possible. They believed that God could intervene in ordinary life. And this belief shaped how they understood the world. Modern people often separate the ordinary from the supernatural. Medieval people did not always make that separation in the same way. A strange event could be seen as a sign. A dream could be meaningful. A vision could be interpreted as a message. A sudden recovery from illness could be called a miracle. A natural event could have religious meaning. The boundary between heaven and everyday life was much closer. This does not mean everyone believed every story. People could be skeptical. People could question visions. Church leaders could investigate claims. But belief in the supernatural was deeply woven into medieval culture. And this made a story like Stephen's possible. A young shepherd claiming to have received a divine message would have been unusual. But it would not necessarily have seemed impossible. People had heard stories about saints. They had heard about holy children. They had heard about visions. They had heard about miracles. So when Stephen spoke about his message, some people believed him. Others may have been uncertain. But enough people listened. And the movement grew. Now let us imagine Stephen again. A young shepherd, perhaps standing in a village. People gathered around him. He speaks quietly. He talks about Jerusalem. He talks about a mission. He talks about the need for young people to travel. The people listen. Some are curious. Some are moved. Some may wonder whether the message is truly from God. A few decide to follow. Then more join. Soon the group becomes large. The story spreads. This is how the religious world of medieval Europe could turn one young person's message into a much larger movement. But there is something else we should consider. The medieval church did not simply approve every religious movement. Church leaders could be cautious. They had their own ideas about how a crusade should be organized. A major crusade required preaching, funding, leadership, military planning, political agreements. The Children's Crusade did not fit neatly into these structures. That made it unusual, and perhaps dangerous. Imagine a large crowd moving without strong official leadership. Who controls them? Who provides food? Who decides where they go? Who protects them? Who speaks for them? These questions become increasingly important. The church might support pilgrimage, but that did not mean every pilgrimage was safe or wise. The authorities might worry about young people leaving their families. Parents might worry. Local officials might worry. And yet the movement continued. The strength of popular religious belief could be difficult to control. This is another important feature of medieval society. People were not simply passive. They could act. They could gather. They could travel. They could respond to religious messages. They could create movements that leaders had not planned. The Children's Crusade was one example of this. Now imagine the world of a medieval child. Your life is very different from the life of a child today. There is no school system like the modern one. Some children learn basic reading. Some learn through religious instruction. Many work from a young age. Farm children help in fields. Children in towns may help their parents. Some become apprentices. Life is closely connected to family work. The idea of childhood itself is different. Children may be expected to contribute to the household. They may take on responsibilities early. So when we hear the word children in the story, we need to avoid imagining modern childhood. A young person in 1212 could have experienced responsibilities that would seem unusual today. They might work long hours. They might travel with family. They might already be engaged or married at a young age, depending on their social position. They might know how to work with animals. They might know how to farm. They might understand hunger and hardship very well. And yet they were still young. They still had hopes. They still had fears. They still wanted belonging. They still looked to adults for guidance. So imagine a young person hearing about Jerusalem. Perhaps they have grown up hearing stories about Jesus. Perhaps they have seen paintings in the church. Perhaps they have heard sermons about the Holy Land. Then someone says, "We are going." The idea could feel enormous. Perhaps this is the first time the young person has imagined doing something beyond the village. Perhaps the journey feels like a calling. Perhaps it feels like an adventure. Perhaps it feels like a way to become part of something larger. This is the emotional world of the movement. Not simply politics, not simply war, but hope, faith, belonging, and the desire to do something meaningful. As the night grows quiet, let us imagine Jerusalem again. Not the modern city, but the medieval city. Stone walls, narrow streets, markets, churches, mosques, homes, pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, animals, dust, sunlight. The city would have been crowded and complicated. It was not simply a peaceful, holy place. It was also a living city. People worked there. People traded there. People argued there. People prayed there. People raised families there. People governed there. People fought for it. The holy city was also an ordinary city, filled with ordinary human life. This is something the travelers could not fully understand from far away. They knew the sacred image. They did not know the everyday reality. For them, Jerusalem was mostly a destination of faith. And perhaps that was enough. because sometimes a destination becomes powerful precisely because we have never seen it. We imagine it. We dream about it. We fill it with meaning. The farther away it is, the larger it can become in the imagination. For the young travelers of 1212, Jerusalem was almost impossibly far. And yet they walked toward it, step by step, day by day, until they reached the sea. And there, the dream met the physical world. The sea did not care about their beliefs. The waves did not change. The ships did not appear by magic. The journey became difficult. And slowly, the movement began to break apart. But the dream itself remained powerful. Even after the travelers disappeared, the dream survived. People continued to tell the story. And that is why, centuries later, we are still here. Still walking the roads. Still imagining the villages. Still listening to the bells. Still watching the sea. Still wondering about the young people who left home in 1212. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not simply what happened. Perhaps the deeper question is why so many people were willing to believe that they could change the course of history. Why did they believe that God would help them? Why did they believe that young people could succeed where powerful armies had failed? Why did the idea feel possible? To answer that, we must understand one more part of medieval religious life. The belief in innocence. The belief that humble people could be especially close to God. The belief that the poor could be blessed. The belief that children could represent purity. And the belief that God might choose unexpected people. These ideas were deeply rooted in Christian teaching. The humble could be lifted up. The weak could become strong. The last could become first. The small could become important. These ideas made the story of a young leader and young followers emotionally powerful. Perhaps God had chosen them because they were not powerful. Perhaps their lack of weapons was the point. Perhaps their weakness was their strength. Such ideas could inspire people. And perhaps they helped turn a small religious movement into a much larger one. Now the night is deep. We have traveled backward through time. We have walked through Jerusalem. We have remembered earlier crusades. We have imagined medieval pilgrimage. We have thought about the world of young people. And slowly, the children's crusade becomes easier to understand. It was not an isolated, strange event. It grew from the world around it. A world where Jerusalem mattered deeply. A world where pilgrimage was normal. A world where crusades had become part of religious culture. A world where visions and miracles were taken seriously. A world where young people could work, travel, and participate in religious movements. A world where stories could travel from village to village. All of these things came together in 1212. And then the movement began. The travelers walked. The roads carried them south. The mountains rose before them. The sea waited. And eventually, the dream began to change. But there is still much more to the story. We have not yet followed all the different paths. We have not yet looked carefully at what happened to the French followers. We have not yet explored the stories of the ships in detail. We have not yet followed the German travelers through Italy. And we have not yet considered what happened to the people who returned home. So let us remain here for tonight. Imagine a quiet medieval village. A small church stands at the center. A candle burns inside. The road is empty. The fields are dark. Somewhere far away, the Mediterranean is moving beneath the moon. And somewhere beyond that sea, Jerusalem waits. The young travelers may never reach it, but their footsteps have already become part of history. The story continues, and in the next chapter, we will return to the travelers themselves. We will follow the French movement more closely. We will return to Stephen. We will look at how the crowd grew. And we will slowly follow the road toward the Mediterranean again. The night is peaceful. The road is quiet. And the story is waiting. What happened to the young followers after they reached the Mediterranean? The night is peaceful. The old roads are quiet. The fields are dark beneath the sky. And somewhere far away, the Mediterranean is still moving gently against the shore. But our story now returns to France. Back to the beginning. Back to Stephen. Back to the young people who heard his message and decided to follow him. Let us take a slow walk through the French countryside once again. Imagine the year 1212. The morning is soft. A pale mist rests over the fields. The first light touches the roofs of a small village. A church bell rings. People begin their daily work. Farmers walk toward the fields. Animals are fed. Bread is prepared. Wood is carried. The ordinary day begins. But something unusual is happening nearby. People are gathering. More people than usual. Young people are standing beside the road. Some carry walking staffs. Some have small bundles. Some carry crosses. Some have little more than the clothes they are wearing. They are waiting. Waiting for Stephen, the young shepherd who has told them that they have a mission. A mission connected to Jerusalem. A mission that, according to the story, will succeed where powerful armies have failed. Imagine being there. You look around. You see familiar faces. People from nearby villages. Young boys. Young girls. Teenagers. Adults. Perhaps parents. Perhaps older pilgrims. Some people are excited. Some are uncertain. Some are simply curious. And then Stephen appears. He is young. He does not look like a king. He does not look like a knight. He does not wear shining armor. He carries no great sword. He is a shepherd, an ordinary young person who has suddenly become the center of a religious movement. People listen to him. He speaks about Jerusalem. He speaks about the Holy Land. He speaks about a mission. He tells the people that they must travel. And the people begin to move. One step, then another. The road opens before them. Behind them is home. Ahead is the unknown. The movement has begun. But what exactly did Stephen tell them? The surviving accounts are not all the same. That is important. Later writers describe Stephen as claiming that Jesus had appeared to him. He said that he had been given a letter for the King of France. He believed that he had been told to take this message to the king. And perhaps in his mind, this was only the beginning. The young shepherd was not simply telling people to walk toward Jerusalem. He believed he had been given a task, a divine task. And because he was young and seemed sincere, people listened. Imagine the first few days of the journey. At first, everything may feel exciting. The road is new. The group is growing. People are talking. Perhaps songs are being sung. Perhaps prayers are being said. The travelers feel that they are part of something important. They are leaving ordinary life behind. They are becoming pilgrims. They are walking toward a holy destination. The feeling may have been powerful, but a journey changes once the first excitement fades. The road becomes ordinary. The sun becomes hot. The feet begin to hurt. The food becomes repetitive. The nights become uncomfortable. The travelers begin to understand that this is not a short walk. Still, they continue. Imagine the road through northern France. Rolling fields, small forests, villages separated by long stretches of farmland, streams crossing the roads, old bridges, churches, manor houses, windmills, cattle, sheep, farm workers. The travelers pass all of this. Sometimes people watch them from doorways. Sometimes villagers come outside. Perhaps some offer bread. Perhaps some offer water. Perhaps some simply stare. A large group of young pilgrims is unusual. People want to know where they are going. The answer remains the same. Jerusalem. The word travels with them. Jerusalem. 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 The group becomes larger. And this creates a strange situation. The more people join, the more difficult the journey becomes. More people need food. More people need water. More people need places to sleep. More people need protection. The group may have looked impressive, but it also became difficult to manage. Imagine a village expecting a few travelers. Instead, hundreds arrive. The village has only so much bread, only so much water, only so much space. People may be generous, but generosity has limits. If a family gives away too much food, they may not have enough for themselves. This was a world where food security was never guaranteed. A poor harvest could cause hunger. A harsh winter could make life difficult. So large groups of pilgrims could create problems. Some villages may have welcomed them. Others may have asked them to leave quickly. The travelers would have to continue. And so the road carried them onward. Perhaps the group slept in fields. Perhaps some found shelter in churches. Perhaps monasteries offered food. Perhaps wealthy households gave charity. Pilgrims were often considered deserving of help. But there were limits. And as the group moved farther south, the difficulties increased. The young travelers were not experienced soldiers. They were not professional pilgrims. Many were ordinary people. Some had probably never traveled far from their homes. And now they were moving across unfamiliar territory. Imagine a young person walking beside a friend. The friend says, "How far is Jerusalem?" You do not know. Someone says it is very far. Another person says it will not take long. A third person says that God will guide you. You keep walking. The answer does not matter as much as the belief. The destination is still ahead. And perhaps the group believes that the journey will somehow become easier. Maybe a miracle will happen. Maybe the king will help. Maybe the church will help. Maybe ships will appear. Maybe the sea will open. At this stage, hope can fill the gaps where practical plans are missing. And hope is powerful. But hope can also make people ignore danger. This is especially true when people believe they have a divine mission. If you believe God has chosen you, turning back can feel like disobedience. So you continue. Even when you are tired. Even when you are hungry. Even when you are uncertain. The road continues. And Stephen's reputation grows. People begin to see him not simply as a shepherd. He becomes a leader. Perhaps some followers believe that he has special spiritual authority. Perhaps they believe his vision proves that he has been chosen. Others may simply follow because their friends are following. The group now has its own identity. They are the travelers. They are the pilgrims. They are the people going to Jerusalem. That identity can be powerful. When people become part of a group, they can do things they would not do alone. A person who would never leave home alone may leave with friends. A young person who would never walk across France alone may do so with hundreds of others. The group provides courage. The group provides companionship. The group provides meaning, but it also creates pressure. If everyone else is walking, you may feel that you must walk too. If everyone believes, you may feel that you should believe. If everyone says Jerusalem is possible, you may feel that doubt is wrong. This is another part of the human story. Movements grow not only through ideas. They grow through relationships. Friends influence friends. Families influence families. Neighbors influence neighbors. A crowd creates its own energy. And the children's crusade was no different. Now imagine the travelers approaching the town of Vendôme. The exact details of their route are difficult to establish. But medieval accounts connect Stephen's movement with places in northern France. The group is traveling. The road is busy. The number of people is large. People are talking. Perhaps local officials are beginning to notice. Perhaps churchmen are hearing reports. Perhaps some adults are starting to worry. A movement of young people is becoming impossible to ignore. And Stephen eventually reaches the royal court. This part of the story is especially important. According to later accounts, Stephen went to see King Philip II of France. Imagine entering the world of a king. The difference is enormous. Stephen comes from a simple background. He is a young shepherd. The king lives surrounded by officials, guards, nobles, and servants. The royal court is a place of power. People speak carefully. They bow. They wait. They understand hierarchy. Stephen arrives with a religious message. He believes he has been sent. He wants the king to listen. Imagine the king hearing the story. A young shepherd says he has received a divine command. He has a message for the king. He wants to lead young people toward the Holy Land. Perhaps the king is surprised. Perhaps he is skeptical. Perhaps he listens carefully. According to the traditional accounts, King Philip did not simply accept Stephen's message. Instead, he sought advice from church authorities. The story says that Stephen was told to stop the movement. This is important. It shows that the royal and religious authorities did not necessarily support what Stephen was doing. The movement was not an officially organized French royal expedition. It was something that had developed from below, from ordinary people, from a young religious leader, from popular enthusiasm. And that made it difficult to control. But Stephen's followers did not simply disappear. They continued. This is one of the most interesting parts of the story. Even when powerful authorities did not support the movement, people were still willing to follow. Perhaps some never heard the order. Perhaps some disagreed. Perhaps the movement had already become too large. Perhaps Stephen himself continued to believe that he had been chosen. Whatever the reason, the travelers remained on the road. Imagine that. A young shepherd receives no royal support, but hundreds or thousands of people still follow him. That tells us something about the strength of popular religious belief. The movement did not depend entirely on the king. It had its own momentum. And once a movement gains momentum, it can become difficult to stop. The travelers continued south. The weather changed. The landscape changed. The roads became longer. The excitement slowly became mixed with exhaustion. Every day was similar. Wake, walk, rest, eat, pray, sleep, then wake again. This rhythm is easy to imagine. And perhaps it is exactly this ordinary rhythm that makes the story so interesting. History often remembers the great moments, but most of the journey was probably made of ordinary hours. Walking, waiting, eating, sleeping, walking again. Imagine the sound of hundreds of footsteps on a dirt road. Soft, regular, slow. The sound moves through the countryside. Perhaps a bird flies overhead. Perhaps a farmer watches from a field. Perhaps a church bell rings somewhere in the distance. The travelers continue. As the sun becomes stronger, they look for shade. A tree, a wall, a building, anything that offers relief. Someone drinks water. Someone shares bread. A young traveler sits down. Another traveler waits. The group moves slowly. This is not an army marching at military speed. It is a pilgrimage, a human procession, and human processions move slowly. The old, the young, the sick, the tired, everyone moves at a different pace. The group stretches along the road. At the front, people are already far ahead. At the back, others are still leaving the previous village. This makes communication difficult. Someone at the front may not know what is happening at the back. Someone at the back may not know where the leader is. A group this large can become confused, and confusion can become dangerous. Imagine losing sight of your friends. You stop for a moment. The crowd continues moving. You look around. You cannot see the person you were walking with. You call their name. No answer. You walk faster. Still nothing. Now you are worried. This could happen easily in a large medieval crowd. There were no mobile phones, no quick messages, no maps on screens, no way to locate someone. You simply had to find them. And sometimes you could not. So even before the sea, the movement may have been breaking into smaller groups. Some people traveling together, some traveling alone, some joining new groups, some returning home. The great crowd was never as simple as the later stories suggest. And yet the idea of Jerusalem kept the movement together. The destination remained powerful. Jerusalem, a name that could make a long road feel meaningful. Now imagine a night in the countryside. The travelers have stopped. The sky is clear. The stars are bright. The fires are small. People sit around them. Someone is telling a story. Someone is praying. Someone is repairing a shoe. Someone is eating the last piece of bread. A young traveler looks toward the darkness. Perhaps they think about the sea. They may have heard that it is still far away. Perhaps they have never seen the sea. They wonder what it will look like. They imagine ships. They imagine Jerusalem. Perhaps they imagine walking into the holy city. Perhaps they imagine people welcoming them. Perhaps they imagine a miracle. The imagination can travel faster than the body. While the traveler is still in France, the mind is already in Jerusalem. This is the power of a dream. And perhaps it helped the travelers continue. The next morning comes. The fires are cold. The birds begin to sing. The road waits. The travelers rise. Another day. Another road. Another village. Another night. And slowly, the French movement approaches the southern part of the country. The landscape changes. The travelers are moving closer to the Mediterranean world. The air may become warmer. The roads become busier. There are more merchants, more travelers, more towns. The group is getting closer to the sea. And perhaps the excitement returns. They have walked so far. The sea is finally ahead. Maybe now the dream will become real. Maybe ships will be waiting. Maybe the journey will suddenly become easy. But the travelers do not yet understand what awaits them. The Mediterranean is not a simple bridge. It is a vast world of trade, politics, storms, and distance. The people who control the ships are merchants and sailors. They have their own interests. They do not necessarily care about the pilgrim's religious mission. A ship owner needs money. A sailor needs wages. A merchant needs cargo space. A voyage needs food and water. The travelers may have none of these things. So even as they approach the sea, the hardest part may still be ahead. Imagine reaching the coast after walking for weeks. You hear the waves before you see them. Then the road rises slightly. You look ahead, and suddenly there it is. The Mediterranean. Blue, wide, endless. The travelers stop. For some, it may be the first time they have ever seen the sea. They stand silently. The water stretches to the horizon. Ships move slowly. Gulls fly above the shore. The wind smells of salt. Someone says, "There it is." The destination is no longer an idea. The sea is real, and Jerusalem is somewhere beyond it. The travelers have reached the edge of their known journey. Perhaps some are filled with joy. Perhaps some are afraid. Perhaps some are simply exhausted. They have come so far. Now they need ships. And they need help. The road behind them is enormous. The sea in front of them is even larger. The travelers gather along the coast. Some search for ships. Some search for food. Some search for shelter. Some pray. Some wait. And Stephen's great promise is about to face its greatest test. Can a movement of poor young pilgrims really cross the Mediterranean? Can they find enough ships? Can they pay? Can they survive the voyage? Can they reach Jerusalem? These questions have no easy answers. But the travelers are still hopeful. The evening comes. The sun lowers over the water. The sky becomes soft. The waves reflect the fading light. The travelers sit along the shore. Some are talking. Some are silent. Perhaps Stephen is speaking to the group. Perhaps he reminds them of their mission. Perhaps he tells them to remain faithful. Perhaps he says that God will provide a way. We cannot know exactly what words were spoken. The sources do not give us every conversation. But we can imagine the mood. A mixture of exhaustion and expectation. They have reached the sea. The next step is unknown. A few ships are anchored in the distance. The travelers watch them. Perhaps tomorrow they will find a ship. Perhaps tomorrow they will begin the crossing. Perhaps tomorrow the miracle will happen. For now they wait. And the sea keeps moving. Slowly, quietly, without changing. As the night grows darker, the travelers settle down. The stars appear. The moon rises. The water shines beneath it. Some people sleep. Some pray. Some think about home. Some think about Jerusalem. And some may simply listen to the waves. The road south has ended. The sea has begun. The young followers of Stephen have come farther than many of them ever imagined. But they still have a long way to go. And in the next chapter, we will stay with them at the coast. We will look more closely at the ports, at the ships, at the sailors, at the choices the travelers faced, and at the moment when their dream of crossing the sea began to collide with the realities of medieval travel. The sea is waiting. The ships are waiting. And the young pilgrims are waiting too. Will someone take them across? Will the journey continue? Or will the road to Jerusalem finally come to an end at the water's edge? As the waves move softly against the shore, let us leave that question for the next chapter. Next part arrives soon.